Україна, знову до нас поперлася москальня. Казавши на парад Київ йде, любим сусідам руський мір принесе. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Десь у полях, танки ворожі шукав собі шлях, а фермери українські ті танки знайшли і собі на тракторі додому потягли. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна засіває в землю руські добрива. Каже Пісков, що потерь у нас нет, з неба летить вам Байрактара привет. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна, Україна, стала до бою і міцна, як стіна. Б'є ЗСУ, артилерія б'є, жоден москаль у наш дім не зайде. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир.
Україну Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячий хотар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 135 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, and we have some pretty good news today to show that the Ukrainians may actually be turning the tide of the war for a short while, and may be gaining the upper hand for some time. We'll be covering that later on tonight, but of course, I do have to switch tones for a short moment to cover some unfortunate news that does not pertain to the war in Ukraine. Last night, in the middle of our stream, around 1 hour in, we got the unfortunate news that the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, had been shot in the back twice by an improvised shotgun by an unknown man in the crowd. As the night progressed, we ended the stream, and Shinzo Abe's condition was worsening, but he was still alive. We got the news as of this morning that Shinzo Abe has officially been declared dead, and the assassination is of unknown origin at the moment, and they're currently trying to assess who killed him and why. With that news out of the way, we're now going to be going into the schedule for tonight's news, and of course, I do wish the best to everyone in Japan who may be watching the stream tonight. Shinzo Abe, just as a quick mention, was one of the most successful prime ministers in Japanese history, especially in the amount of time he was able to hold the tenure of prime minister, some 8.5 years in total, which is longer than any other prime minister in Japanese history. Of course, they will most likely be having major ceremonies for his death, and I do say that if any state dignitary from Japan deserves such celebrations, it would be someone who is as long served as him and as widely popular in Japan as Shinzo Abe was. With that, we're now going to be returning back to Ukraine and continuing with our normal stream and news. Starting off tonight, we'll of course be beginning in Russia. We actually have some big news tonight as Putin and his spin doctors have come up with a story that he's trying to go with through and through, and we're actually going to be able to hear it tonight for one of the first times on stream, the exact talking points he actually says out of his mouth. After we cover that news, we'll then be moving immediately into our location unknowns and covering the 6 of them that we have tonight. After we cover the Russian news and the location unknown news, we're going to start moving towards the Kharkiv and Luhansk region, but before we get there, we're of course going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on into the Kharkiv region and the northern Donbas. Once we get to the northern Donbas, this is where the major news for the night is going to start coming into play, and so we're actually going to be covering the Donetsk news as well in the same segment, because based off of some more damage and destruction we've seen today that has been following a trend for the past week and a half, it does appear that these actions that the Ukrainians have been taking here on film are actually changing the tide of the war in the Lysychansk area and may be leading to some pretty exciting results here in the future, which we'll of course be discussing in detail. After we cover the northern Donbas, as well as the one bit of news we've gotten from the Donetsk region, we're going to start moving back up towards Krasnohard in the Dnipro area, but before we get there, we're of course going to answer another 3 questions from the chat. After we get done answering those questions, we'll then move to the Krasnohard area. We'll also be moving down towards the Zaporizhia front line and covering all the news that we've gotten in the Kherson area. The amount of news that we're starting to get out of this area is starting to indicate that it is becoming a hotspot and will most likely be the next major offensive that occurs on this front line during the war. With that, we'll have covered all the news for today. There's no international news to speak of. We have a lot to talk about domestically. We're then going to travel up to Kyiv to listen to the speech from President Zelensky, and I'm just going to let y'all know in advance, the marker is not accurate. He was on a train traveling back to Kyiv again, but we'll of course cover why he's on a train heading back to Kyiv once we get to the Southern Front segment. And so, without further ado, let's get into this big night of news. Starting off in Moscow. In Moscow, we've actually heard Putin speaking to his own parliament for one of the few times that we've seen on film, and we've seen that his spin doctors and himself has come up with a master narrative to propagate to the Russian public, and I just want y'all to hear it for yourselves. The translation is at the bottom of the screen, and it is insane what kind of story he's trying to spin, and I will be pausing this because he doesn't deserve any respect. I'll be pausing this and, of course, interjecting with what we know and how the war has progressed as a counter to what he's trying to propagate as a lie. Anyways, here's the speech from Putin.
Слышим сегодня, что мы начали войну на Донбассе, на Украине. Нет. Ее развязал этот самый коллективный Запад, организовав и поддержав на Украине антиконституционную.
All right, so right here he says, the West organized and supported the unconstitutional armed coup in Ukraine in 2014. That's entirely false. The Maidan-head riots were an inside job, pretty much, that occurred amongst the Ukrainian public who was wanting to throw out Yanukovych, who was a pro-Russian president at the time. That's the entire reason that started. So he's already lying and trying to draw on the West and pretty much a social change within Ukraine. The kind of change that happened in Ukraine at that time with the Maidan-head riot is very similar to the Boxer Rebellion in China in 1900, or I guess you could say another good example would be the Russian Revolution. There wasn't really a lot of outside play in either of those events, just like it was in Ukraine, but we can see Putin trying to shift the blame over to Western countries, so that way it fits the bill of the current political needs they have.
Вооруженный переворот в 2014 году, а затем поощряя и оправдывая геноцид в отношении людей на Донбассе. Вот этот самый коллективный Запад и есть прямой зачинщик, виновник того, что сегодня происходит. Если этот самый Запад хотел спровоцировать конфликт для того, чтобы перейти к новому этапу борьбы с Россией, к новому этапу сдерживания нашей страны, то можно сказать, что...
All right, so this right here is the master spin that Putin has been putting on everything, is that the West is wanting to take down Russia, and it's not wanting them to have anything to do with everyone else because they hate Russians. That's not true. And if you go and look back at the past 30 years of history where the Russian Federation has existed as a country, that's not true. It's just not true at all. If it was, then how come Western companies like McDonald's, Dwar, and a whole bunch of others, that's just two of them, there are millions of them, how come they were allowed to go into Russia and conduct business? And how come Russian businessmen were allowed to conduct business with the West? When the Russian Federation initially formed, the plan was, by the West, to eventually try and pull them into the Western economic sphere and just bring them in and kind of have this one giant homogenous economic machine. But then Putin started to change those objectives and trying to create a Russian economic sphere once he came into power. And about a few years down the road, around 2004, 2006, he started to try and create the Russian sphere again and try and bring them up as a rival to the United States and a world power or a superpower in the future to be reckoned with. And so what he's saying here is not true, because at the beginning, we were, of course, supporting trade and business with the Russians, and now he's trying to make it seem like we've hated them the whole time, we've never wanted anything to do with them.
Что это в известной степени удалось. И война развязана, и санкции введены. Сегодня мы слышим, что нас хотят победить на поле боя.
We've never actually wanted to beat them on the battlefield. We never say that. In fact, we're doing as much as we can in the West to make sure that we avoid a war. So I don't know why he's saying we're trying to defeat them on the battlefield. The Russians from the very start have been the ones that heightened their nuclear security forces alert status. They've been threatening to invade Poland and any other neighboring countries if they do anything, and threatening to nuke the entire West if an aircraft is sent to Ukraine. So that kind of gives you a perspective of who's really instigating this, but of course the Russians will put the spin on it that they're the innocents and they're being bullied by the West, although they literally were the ones who started this war by invading Ukraine.
Ну, что здесь скажешь? Пусть попробуют. Мы уже много слышали, что Запад хочет воевать с нами до последнего украинца.
He says this is a tragedy for the Ukrainian people. The only tragedy here is that we did not get directly involved to stop this war immediately. And also, what in the world is he talking about with let them try? If the United States tried to put down Russia, it would put it down within an instant. And that's not an American bias as an American. The United States, of course, to go through the speech, has the largest, most powerful military on Earth, the most technologically advanced, and it has a budget to boot, so that way the entire military is brought up to that kind of spec. So if you put the American military directly against the Russians, or hell, if the whole entire war was fallen at sea, if you put the United States Navy up against the Russian Navy and the entire combined arms of the Russian armed forces, we would wipe the floor. And so I don't know why he wants to directly threaten the West to conventional war, because the United States alone could wipe the floor. And then if you include the rest of the European countries in NATO, that's literally twice the firepower, pretty much equivalent to what the US can field entirely on its own.
Это трагедия для украинского народа. Но, похоже, все к этому и идет. Но все должны знать, что мы-то, по большому счету, всерьез пока еще.
And there's the famous saying, we haven't even started anything serious yet. So, you know, the whole entire war so far, 4.5 months of it, you know, the sinking of the Moskva, 37,000 men killed, all of that's not even starting yet. We're just beginning. In fact, we have all of this magical stuff that doesn't exist anymore that we can pull out of the woodworks to really start off this war. You know, and I guess what Putin's imagining is really starting the war is pulling the T-34s out of storage and also getting... hell, I guess the Aurora out of St. Petersburg and bringing it down into the Black Sea. This is the stupidest argument that the Russians have ever given, and it's the biggest cope they ever have, is that they went into this war with their best forces, their best equipment, and to try and end the war as fast as possible. And their strategies in the first opening days showed that they were expecting Ukraine to collapse within at least 3 or 4 days, or maybe a week. And now, 19 weeks in, they're going to start saying, we haven't even started fighting yet. Come on. That's a sad spin right there.
Еще ничего и не начинали. При этом мы не отказываемся и от мирных переговоров, но те, кто отказывается, должны знать, что чем...
And also, one last thing before I let the speech run till the end. He says we're not saying we're not going to negotiate for peace. The problem is that whenever the Russians negotiate, quote unquote, for peace, their ultimatum is that Ukraine surrenders to us entirely and we pretty much annex the country, and that's our peace agreement. So they're never refusing to go into a peace agreement, but their terms are completely unacceptable. And so the peace agreements will never actually make any ground, and so they're pretty much not going into peace agreements, if you see what I'm saying. So once again, a wordplay by the Russians on what they're actually saying versus what they're actually doing.
Кто отказывается, должны знать, что чем дальше, тем сложнее им будет с нами договариваться.
Anyways, that's the end of his speech. Had to break that all down, but what a stupid speech. And to think that trying to invite the West into an open war is a smart idea, he's living in an absolute delusion. Imagine how badly the United States would beat the Russians on their own with how the war in Ukraine is going right now. The war in Ukraine is going terribly. And just to give you all an idea of what the Russians are actually facing, Ukrainian military budget. Let's pull up the budget for the armed forces of Ukraine. So let's see. Spending fell in 2021 to 5.9 billion. But this accounted for 3.2% of the nation's GDP. So it's a really high level of spending for the Ukrainians. But $5.9 billion a year is what it costs to beat the Russian military. Now let's put that into perspective of the Russians. Russian military budget. And let's look at that. The Russians in 2021 spent nearly $66 billion on their military. The Russians are getting their asses handed to them by a country that only spent $6 billion, 10 times, well, Russians, to put it a better way, the Russians are spending 10 times more than the Ukrainians on their military, and they're still getting beat. They still have not even taken over the country over 4.5 months with a military budget 10 times larger. And so, considering that they're getting it handed to them by a country that has a budget 10 times smaller than theirs, let's see what the U.S. military budget is, and let's see how that would compare. U.S. military budget. Oh my god, $801 billion. Y'all, I don't think the Russians stand a chance, because if a country can defeat them with just $6 billion a year in a military budget, imagine what a $801 billion a year military could do to the Russians. It would be unbelievable. The Russians would be like the Iraqis in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. They would just get wiped out in a month. So I don't really think that he should be threatening us to an open war, because a $6 billion military versus an $800 billion military is a pretty big difference. Also, let's see, the U.S. actually spends 3.7% of our gross domestic product, which is the amount of money that the United States, I guess you could say, generates in a year. 3.7%, and that's compared to Ukraine's 3.2%. And that gives you another idea of how strong the United States is economically, considering that $801 billion is only 3.7% of our GDP. So in terms of trying to actually fight a war and carry it through with the Russians, we're going to be able to travel that extra distance that the Russians just would not be able to. And 66 billion is literally 4.1% of their GDP. So they're already almost on par economically with the U.S.'s spending. They couldn't go any higher, really. And so with that, just had to go over that all. Once again, I don't think it's ever a smart idea to threaten the United States into an open war. It's not going to be a winning one. And so with that, we're now going to move away from Russia and away from the usual stupidity we see in there. And we're now going to move down to Ukraine to see what the Ukrainians have been doing here inside of their own country. And it appears that we've got some pretty good stuff to start off with. Today, we've seen an R-18 destroy a Kamaz supply truck. Gotta mute that real quick. But we see the drone camera. It looks like it's in some kind of a casing. Well, actually, no, this is apparently a night vision camera, and they're looking at the R-18. A giant octocopter. The thing's massive. I think Amazon may use those to deliver packages, or they're trying those out to deliver packages, just to give y'all a scale of how big those things are and how much weight they can actually carry. We're now seeing it scoping out the battlefield, and we can see a tank over here on the left side of the screen where my mouse cursor is. We can now see them dropping the bomblets onto the tanks. This tank is already smoking. Second bomblet's going down. And a solid hit. That explosion seems somewhat significant, and it looks like that tank might be knocked out as the fire was coming from the engine bay. Well, you can now see them hit what appeared to be an armored personnel carrier, and it immediately blew into pieces. Whenever I say pieces, I imagine Reese's Pieces, so if I ever say that, that's what I'm talking about. Now the R-18's coming back down. Ukrainians grab onto it like it's a giant pizza, and that's the end of the video. Very successful mission. Of course, R-18s don't cost a lot of money, but that R-18 just went out and caused millions of dollars of damage to the Russian military that is going to be irreplaceable because they no longer have the technology being imported for them to produce new tanks with those modern systems in it. And so great to see that the Ukrainians are being very cost-effective out there, because that's something that a lot of people don't realize in wars. That's always important to make sure that you're being cost-effective with how you're, wiping out the enemy. If you're spending $10,000 to wipe out a $5 million tank, that's actually pretty good. You never want to spend $5 million to destroy $5 million. Then it's an equal exchange. But with that, great to see the Ukrainians, of course, knocking out more Russians. And now we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the inside of a Panzerhaubitze 2000 inside of Ukraine in operation. And it is a crazy video. The first reason why it's crazy is because this turret is so freaking big, this guy is standing up inside of it and walking around like it's an apartment. Sadly, I'll have to mute it. But when you see... Oh yeah, also, I want to go over this, the auto-loading system in the Panzerhaubitze. So when the gun fires, you can already see down here the next shell, which also a viewer of mine gave me, a plastic 155mm shell. And that thing is massive. I actually got it behind me, and it's actually huge just for scale. So this thing is the 155mm shell that will go into the gun. You see the gun fire. He pushes the button for it to fire. It fires, and the gun automatically lifts this shell, which is heavy as all get out, up to the breech, and then it shoves it in. And so it does the most difficult part of the job for the crew on its own. The crew does not have to worry about putting that shell into the breech. The tank does it all on its own. It then shoves the shell in at the speed of light. He then throws in the charge, which the charge is what will actually fling the shell down range. We can now see that the next shell is already ready below the breech to be loaded the next time. The operator then closes the breech, clicks the button to fire. It fires. Next shell is shot into the breech immediately. You now see him clicking the button again, and pretty much however fast the crew is able to shove the propellant into the breech is how fast this gun can fire. And we can see that it's actually fairly fast. It's just a couple of seconds. With that, that's the end of the video, and of course, I'd like to make a note that the inside of this Panzerhaubitze is incredibly clean. It may be because it's new. This is also a testament to how clean the Germans keep up their SPGs, because I'm assuming that it was most likely used by the Germans before they handed it over. But what a clean interior of this tank. And of course, knowing the Ukrainian record book with how well they keep up their tanks, this thing will probably be returned to Germany, if it does get returned to Germany, in better condition than the Germans gave it over to them with. So, of course, great to see. Also, we can see an AK-74 sitting over here on the side of the turret. But it is impressive to know that the Germans finally did send over those Panzerhaubitze 2000s, and that fast reload rate is no lie. We just saw it right there on film. Moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, we can then see the Ukrainians using an international array of weapons. First, we can see them using a German Matador, which is an anti-tank weapon, and then after that, we see them using an American grenade launcher. And I've got it muted, but we can see him leveling the Matador. He then fires it, and then he drops the Matador, and then he picks up an American grenade launcher. If you go to Ukraine right now, I think you're going to find a wider array of weapons there than you will anywhere else in the world. They're using former Soviet weapons, current Western weapons. They are using the whole gamut, and the Ukrainian soldier has to be incredibly agile and quick to learn mentally to be able to try and pick up all of these different kinds of systems. But of course, it's great to see that all of this Western aid is pouring in, and also huge credit to the Germans for sending over the Matador, because we had not heard about that on stream until right now. And so not only did the Germans send over the Panzerhaubitze 2000s, they've also sent over the Matador. We don't really know a lot about that system, but it does appear to be an in-law or a Panzerfaust 4 of a sort, and that's still great to hear that they do have more anti-tank weapons. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we then see some unseen Switchblade footage. Now, some people have been asking, what about the Switchblades, Enforcer? What are those doing? Have we gotten any footage about them? And for the longest time, for about a month and a half, the answer was no, we had heard nothing about them. But today, we got a small little cache, a minute and 40 seconds worth, of unseen Switchblade footage of the Ukrainians using these things in combat. And so here's the video, and we're going to see how these things perform, because the last we heard, they were doing okay, but not great. You can see the little crosshair here. It looks like it's going down towards its target, which appears to be a Russian trench. It looks like they're going straight for the bush, and now the footage has frozen up for a second. And we can now see the Russians carting out what appears to be a wounded or a dead man, and they're taking the entire platoon with them to try and carry this guy away. We can now see them appearing to lift up another guy in a stretcher. They drop him, they pick him up, and then they start carrying him off. This also gives you an idea of how many... Oh my god. I haven't watched this footage in too far, but this idiot right here, he's walking on a flat path, alright? And the path probably has no holes in it at all. It's probably been here for a while, considering how well beaten out it looks. And this idiot trips and drops the stretcher, and the goofball in front of him keeps on walking after the stretcher slips out of his hands like it's a vaudeville routine. Look, he trips, and this guy went walking for another 20 feet and didn't even know the stretcher wasn't even in his hands. Gosh, man. Sometimes the Russians blow me away with, like, their incompetence, but there it is, right there. I mean, like, we're going to play that one more time just so that way y'all can see the vaudeville routine in full glory, and we're going to let the video keep running. So there we go, trips and falls, that guy keeps on walking, then he turns around, he's like, oops, we dropped the wounded guy. And so then they're just like, well, forget him, and then they just start walking off without him! And we have, of course, seen this footage before from a Switchblade where it hits the tank. There's the impact footage of it, but honestly, it didn't really appear like it destroyed the tank. It looked like it did kill the crew, though, that's one thing we know for certain. Now we see the Switchblade going... Ooh. We just saw the Switchblade switch from a car to a man, and it started going straight for the man who's walking down there. So we can see him walking by the Scooby-Doo van, and the Switchblade goes right for him. And I think that was a bad day, as the camera footage did cut out, letting us know it did explode. Now we see the Switchblade going into another compound. Looks like he's going for one of the little huts on the side. And the video abruptly ends there, letting us know it did hit the target, but of course, with Switchblade cameras, we never get an idea of how effective the damage was, because the camera gets destroyed in the process of using this thing. But from the footage we could see, it was hitting mostly soft targets, which does let us know that apparently Switchblades do not have any kind of armor-penetrating qualities to them, which was kind of known already. But hopefully they're being used to great effect, and hopefully we'll get more footage of these Switchblades showing us that they are being effectively used. But man, I mean, like, I'm glad that there was a drone around to watch those Russians literally just drop the stretcher and then be like, forget the guy, and just wander off. That's the saddest thing I've ever seen so far. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Russian tank knocked out by a Stugna. We haven't seen the Stugna footage in a long while. Now, I have seen them, and I have had the option of putting them on the news, but I usually remove them in favor of putting on more news that may be showing something else around the front lines that's more important. But I did bring back Stugna footage tonight as a treat, and this is the skiff version that is in the Arabic interface. And so here's the video. The Stugna has fired. You can see the missile is traveling on its way, and there's 2 Russian vehicles out there in the distance. You can hardly see them, though. And they got the crosshair dead on the tank. You can see one of the vehicles moving up the road, and boom shakalaka, one of them has been knocked out. So they didn't get 2 of them. Of course, you know, that would be too much to ask for one Stugna to knock out 2. That's a 2 birds with 1 stone kind of thing, which rarely ever happens. But they did take out one of the tanks that was on the road with the Stugna, and you can't ever ask for more. 1 Stugna, 1 Russian tank knocked out. About $30,000 for the Stugna missile versus a $3.5 million tank. Pretty fair exchange, in my opinion. And I have to say that that's how the Ukrainians will win the wars, is causing more economic damage to the Russians than they cause on themselves, and the Russians can also inflict against them. But of course, great to see, and hopefully we'll get some more Stugna footage like that. Hopefully a kill streak like we used to get, where a single Stugna would knock out almost half or an entirety of a BTG. With that, we're now going to move on to our last bit of location unknown news for the night, where we can see the aftermath of a French anti-tank mine. We actually got the name of the mine, and we'll pull it up after this video, because I too do not know much about this specific version of the mine. You can see that the tank, or whatever was driving through this area, doesn't really exist anymore. It looks like a patch of fire on the road, and everything else around the area is on fire. And so I'd assume that that mine did a fairly good job at what it was intended to do, which was knocking out a Russian tank. So with that, let's actually pull up this mine, the HPD-2A2, and see what this mine is. HPD series of mines. Oh, it's used by the Swiss as well. Interesting. So they're anti-tank landmines. They're electrically fused. That use Misne Chardon effect warheads. That's really cool, and I'll be honest with y'all, I don't know a lot about the Misne Chardon effect. So let's see what this is. Wait a minute. I think I might know what this is. Man, I'm sorry, I don't really think I do know. Let's see. And perpendicular, unlike the blast produces an explosive sheet, expands primarily perpendicular to its plane in both directions. Sadly, I don't know a lot about the system. I can't really explain it to y'all, and I'll just say that and just take the humble pie here and just say I don't know a lot. But here is what an HPD-2 mine looks like, and this one is actually apparently used by the Swiss Army. And we know, if anyone has tried and tested anything militarily, it's the Swiss, because they haven't fought in a war for about 150 years, and the last one they fought in was a civil war. But it's great to see that, of course, these have been sent over as well. Huge credit to the French for sending over Caesar SPGs, airburst munitions, these HPD anti-tank mines. I mean, like, this is really impressive that the French have been sending over so much, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians have a friend in almost everyone in the West: the French, the US, the British, the Polish, the Germans, and so on. So with that, that is the end of our location unknown news, and we're now going to start moving into the Kharkiv area and also the Luhansk, well, really the Donbas area in general. But before we get there, we're of course going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on to the next segment of news. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, folks, and it is now time for the first question segment. And up first, we have a $20 super chat from Kaltenberg, one of our longtime channel supporters, who says, "To victory, Slava Ukraine."
And thank you so much for the support, Kaltenberg. And also, I do agree, to victory, and hopefully the tides that have turned here recently will be permanent. But one never knows. Wars are very dynamic, and it could be a short-term thing, or it could be a long-term thing. Hopefully, very long-term. And so with that, Slava Ukraini. And thank you once again for the support, Kaltenberg, and helping us to run these streams. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from Kimberly Brokaw, or Brokaw. I'm not sure how to say it. Kimberly, please correct me if I'm wrong. Kimberly says, "Appreciate the great job you guys are doing, and Slava Ukraine."
And I thank you so much for the support. It of course helps us out a great deal, and we can't keep on doing this without support from our viewers. And so we're greatly appreciative to everyone who helps us to keep on carrying on with what we do. And thank you so much for the kind words. And we're going to try and keep this up the best we can, along with the summaries and maybe something else. But we'll see about that. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from StrayCat241, who says, "Rest in peace, Shinzo Abe. He was a great man who loved his country and wanted peace in the world." And yes, Stray Cat, I will agree with you completely on that. It is an absolute tragedy that he was assassinated, and may he rest in peace.
And I do agree entirely. Shinzo Abe was, not to take political sides, I never really do, but of course, in memoriam to him, he was an incredible leader for Japan. He was liked heavily by almost every single country in the world. No one really had a mark against the man, and he just was doing what was best for Japan. He actually became prime minister in time. Well, wait a minute, no, I'm sorry, correction. He became prime minister in 2012. He was the prime minister during the Japanese, the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, then pushed back to 2021, and he was leading Japan fairly well. He was also the prime minister during the Fukushima disaster, and for a prime minister to survive through such a cataclysmic event for a country tells you how much support he had amongst the Japanese and how great of a leader they saw him as, and the rest of the world could entirely agree. And so rest in peace to Shinzo Abe, of course, an incredible leader, and he will be sorely missed by everyone around the world. Although he was a former prime minister, he is still one of the most honorable and the longest-serving prime minister in Japanese political history. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that everyone does give a load of respect to the late Shinzo Abe. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the last... Was that the third question, or was that the second one?
So that was actually the third question. And also, real quick, I want to add that if you have a question and you don't want to put in a super chat, feel free to tag either me or the Enforcer and put it in the live chat. At the moment, I am running a little short on live chat questions, so feel free to put yours in, and there's a high likelihood that we can probably answer it before the stream ends tonight.
And so with that, we've actually reached the end of this question segment. If you have sent in a super chat, we will answer all of them by the end of the night. And you don't have to send in a super chat to ask a question. You can just add Enforcer or add Enforcer Matt, and we will try our best to get around to as many questions as possible and answer them. I would like to once again let everyone know that super chats do support this channel, and if you do like what we're doing, supporting us helps us to ensure that we can keep on doing it. Kind of like Wikipedia and kind of like PBS in a way with how they get publicly funded. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the Kharkiv area and also the Donbas and covering that news segment. And then after that, we'll pause for another 3-question segment. Moving on into the Kharkiv area today, we have some good news and we have some bad news. We'll start off with the good news and then move into the bad news. Starting off today, we did see that the 40th Brigade, along with help from the, 92nd Brigade, did manage to destroy even more Russians. So, here's the video. You see a Russian tank moving through the wheat fields. Just blowing through. And I don't know if the Russians ever think about these kind of common sense things, but driving through a ripe field of wheat that's fully grown leaves these terrible looking tire tracks. And not only are they terrible looking, they completely give away your position from satellite. and even from drones that are closer to the ground. And so it's not really a good idea to do these kinds of things at this point in a wheat field like this. You might want to stay to the road just so that way it's harder to spot your unit moving around. But of course, the Russians don't have a lot of sense. And we can see this guy cutting straight out through the wheat field and then pulling up to a tree line where you can see loads of Russian vehicles has used that as a crossroad. The vehicle continues to move on. We can now see another vehicle, or the same one, not entirely sure. They are near a river, so that may give us a good idea of where they may be, which is near a river. And we can see them continuing to push on. The 40th Brigade is just waiting their time for this vehicle to stop, so that way they can start bringing in the fire. Now you see the Ukrainian soldier pointing out on the footage where the tank is. It appears to be on a tree line near the river. And now that it's near a tree line near the river, getting a sip of water, we're assuming the M777s start raining down the pain. And it looks like this Russian vehicle and the crew may not be making it any further than this river. We can now see the Russian tank burning, smoldering, and cooking. Now, if Ukrainians have opened up a new industry during the course of this war, I would certainly say that that industry is Russian barbecue, which is becoming a new culinary treat in Ukraine and a delicacy to the Ukrainians on the front lines. With that, it's great to see that the 40th Brigade and the 92nd Brigade have managed to take out another Russian vehicle. While just one vehicle, every loss counts. And I do have to say this because I think a lot of people have lost this perspective, including myself, so I do have to make sure to say this again. It is an absolute feat that the Ukrainians, who entered this war as the underdogs, have managed to take out a single extra Russian vehicle. No one even expected them to survive the first few days. And they've gone on for 19 weeks now, and every single destroyed vehicle, every single wiped out platoon, squad, or individual soldier is something worth celebrating, because the Ukrainians, you know, just looking at the odds on paper, should have never even survived this far. And so every single unit that the Russians lose is something that should be celebrated by everyone who's pro-Ukrainian, because it's something that no one believed would have ever happened. And now everyone takes it for granted, kind of, including myself. But of course, great to see that the 40th Mechanized Brigade, as well as the 92nd, is still knocking out units in the Kharkiv area. But sadly, there isn't any offensive actions taking place in this area from either side. So we'll, of course, be waiting for more news on that. And I think this front line may just stay stable for the rest of the war. Who knows? But moving on into Kharkiv, we have gotten some unfortunate news. And while the pictures aren't necessarily graphic in terms of what they are showing, well, they're actually pretty graphic. But they're not graphic in the way that is 18 and over, but the images are somewhat disturbing. And so if you are a little squeamish, I would suggest that you just look away from the screen for a second, because we're about to be going over some very serious content. The Russians, while no longer on the ring road near Kharkiv, continue to bombard Kharkiv nearly daily or every other day to just instill raw fear in the Ukrainian populace there. And we can see that those attacks last night did result in several deaths. The artillery barrages of last night killed 3 Ukrainian civilians. You can see a man here hugging a body bag with one of these dead people inside, unfortunately. And the next picture, which is somewhat graphic, you can see them carrying away a body bag, well, something of a tarp with a trash bag in it. The trash bag, of course, has one of the second people who died in it. Of course, the Ukrainian medical crews in Kharkiv are trying their best to make sure that these people are taken away quickly and also given a proper burial. But of course, it is an unfortunate thing to occur, and I just wish that at this point none of this would be happening, so those medical crews didn't always have to be out there and doing such unfortunate and sad things because of what the Russians have been doing to the Ukrainians. The last picture is the most graphic of them all, if I was to call any of them graphic. It actually shows one of these people, now deceased, laying on the ground in the middle of a park with one of the relatives nearby crying for them. We're not going to stay on that picture too long. It's a little too unfortunate for me, but it's an unfortunate thing to see that the Russians keep on bombarding Ukrainian cities and killing these poor, innocent civilians who have nothing really to do with this war and are just trying to live their daily lives. And I asked, once again, I haven't asked this for a while, but I ask that you do call up your representatives and senators if you're here in the United States, and your government officials, members of parliament, and so on for people around the world, and tell them that your nation should continue to support Ukraine because these people and their suffering is entirely wrong. And if our support through military arms can help end this war even sooner, then I would say I'm all for it, and I hope a lot of y'all can agree with me as well. And with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Kharkiv area and moving past the Shuhuv area as well, where we've got no news to report, and onwards down into the Balaklia area, where we also have no other news to report. But as we move closer to Izyum, we did see today that the 93rd Brigade did destroy a Russian tank in somewhat fiery fashion. The video is rather short, but it does show a Russian tank going up in flames. And if that isn't worth celebrating, I don't know what is. Tank got hit, tank blows up, kind of in a crazy looking way. But a pretty nice little sight to see there. It's great to know that the Russians are still losing vehicles, even in some of the quieter areas of the front line like Balaklia, and every single loss is another Russian tank that'll no longer be able to pursue any offensives. That crew will most likely never go on to commit any kind of acts of war crimes against Ukrainian citizens. And so every single tank lost is getting us further and further towards the end of this war. And so hopefully we see more losses like this. And while these frontline losses are important, as we move through the Donbas tonight, y'all are bound to see that the Russians are taking losses that are far more important than a tank or an infantry unit. And so we're going to start moving on further down the front line, and y'all are going to start seeing that this trend is a little serious. But moving on down towards Borodichny, sorry if I mispronounced that, which is near the cave monastery, which was captured some while ago, we can see some Russian tanks trying to pursue a small push in this area across the Seversky Donets River. Suffice it to say, none of them succeeded, and we saw 5 Russian tanks get destroyed literally in the same spot in the road. Y'all aren't going to believe this. I did show this on the short summary today, but this is probably one of the crazier videos I've seen in a while. But just look at the carnage that the Russian units are getting inflicted upon themselves. 1, 2, 3, 4 Russian tanks sit on this road, completely destroyed, burned out, and abandoned, and the 5th tank decided that the other 4 tanks in front of him didn't show a precedent of Russian tanks getting destroyed in the same spot, and so this tank decided to go and push through this area as well. Let's just say it didn't end well for him either, and that was the 5th tank to be destroyed in the exact same spot, completely blocking off the road, and half of an entire BTG has been destroyed in one spot on a road. The Ukrainian artillery is still coming in at this point, making sure to wipe up and wipe out the rest of the Russian units and get them out of there and make sure that this push will not be any more successful than probably the past 3 or 2. We can now see a 6th Russian tank burning and charring on its own away from the other 5, meaning that 60% of a BTG's tank force was just lost in this one small area that you could pretty much see from one drone camera. It's impressive to see, and while 1 tank loss is always impressive and worth celebrating, 6 of them is something impressive. And so I've got to give a huge round of applause to the Ukrainian artillery, who did an incredible job knocking out those 5 tanks in the same spot, and I also have to applaud the Russians on their stupidity for trying to push down the same road after watching tank after tank get destroyed in literally the same spot. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the cave monastery area, which we're going to call this because that's a lot easier to say than the Ukrainian village names. And we're now going to be moving past the Slovyansk area as well, and towards Lysychansk. We did see that the Russians apparently captured some equipment during the Ukrainian retreat, and I'm going to show y'all what they're touting as successes here in Lysychansk. We've actually seen that they've captured some ammunition, and they are very proud to show it off. We can see some in-laws, it seems, maybe a javelin. I'm not really sure if it came with a CLU. Also, notice the absolute physical fitness of the man here. You can tell he is really in fighting condition. Moving on to the next picture, we can then see that they've also set up 155 propelling for cannon. This is a propellant case for a 155mm gun. We can also see what appears to be an RPG shell. I'm not exactly sure about that one, though, but it is set up on a table, along with some other miscellaneous stuff. Moving into the next picture, When you see that they got some 60mm mortar rounds now, this is what's going to win the war for Russia. If they capture a couple of more of these 60mm rounds, which the Ukrainians have hundreds of thousands of, they're going to eventually run out if they capture 4 more, and the war will be over. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, and imagine the Russians actually trying to show this small amount of ammo as a victory. Moving on into the next picture, we can then see another 155mm shell. It appears that it's just a normal 155mm shell. We also have a couple of more mortar rounds, and then you can see ammo boxes further down, and they actually do have pictures of those as well, showing off what appears to be anti-tank launcher cases. I think these may be for the in-laws or the Javelin. I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that these are most likely in-law carrying cases. With that, we're now going to move on to the next picture, where we can see the Russians, some in better physical shape than the others. Notice the bulge under his shirt. I'm sure he has an anti-tank mine under there, or Mr. Lunchtime is finally getting some competition for once. But we can see that they also have some anti-tank mines on the table. Some of them look like they may be live, more or less. And we can also see some shells that appear to be in the same condition as the one that one of my viewers gave, which is a friend of mine. I've met multiple times. They're an incredible family. But that shell right there looks about the same condition as the one they gave me, and that one they gave me was about 100 years old. So I'm not sure if this is a brand new capture, or if the Russians are trying to take an antique and put it up on a table to try and pull the wool over someone's eyes. But based off of the bulge in the stomach on that guy, you're going to have a lot of wool to pull over anyone's eyes in that army. Moving on to the next picture, we can then see a couple of grenades of different kinds on a table. We can also see what appears to be a claymore. And we can also see just some more ammunition boxes, because those are definitely war-winning captures. Moving on into the next picture, we can then see, oh man, now we're really getting into the war-winning stuff. We can see what appears to be, I'm assuming it's 50 caliber ammunition. It looks a lot like 50 caliber. It may be Dishka ammunition, which is slightly different, but we can see here that they've captured at least a couple of 100 rounds of this stuff, and oh man, now the Ukrainians are on the back end now. Now that's scary. Moving on to the next picture, if we can click the button, we can then see what appears to be the launcher for a Stugna. So apparently the Russians were able to capture a single Stugna, which is being shown off here. And we can see that the Russians are trying to show everything in bulk. However much they were able to capture, they're showing, and apparently they were only able to capture a single Stugna, which tells you how well that's going for them. And in the last picture, when you see a Ukrainian helmet that has a bullet hole in it. It doesn't look like it went, well, it may have gone all the way through. We can't really tell, though. There is a little bit of a darkness there at the back, so maybe it did go through. But we can see a Ukrainian helmet here that was shot through. And that's all the Russians have to brag there. But they did manage to also have a tank display put up of all of the captured Ukrainian vehicles that they've gotten so far. And before we go into this footage, well, these pictures, really, because it's a series of pictures again, I want to make this clear, because I did look into this a lot, and I did find some pretty convincing evidence that a lot of these vehicles were not taken from the Lysychansk area as captures from that battle. They're in fact from the entirety of the eastern and southern fronts, wherever a Ukrainian tank was overrun and captured, and they brought them all to Lysychansk to show them off. And so before we go into that footage, I want to give that disclaimer, so that way I don't have the people sitting in the comments section going, have I been lied to this whole time? Because there's a lot of people who say that whenever I show anything that shows something like this. So I just wanted to let y'all all know that before we go into these pictures. And so look at the war that Russia's winning. They managed to capture an MTLB. Ooh, only one. I mean, like, if they managed to capture 10, I would be impressed, but they only managed to capture one. Moving on into the next picture, we can see that they've gotten, a BMP-2. Oh, scary. And only one. I would like to make that clear. Only one. So that's pretty scary. They've also captured a Kraz armored car. Ooh, that's really scary too. And this one looks to be in terrible condition, which is not a Ukrainian norm. I don't know if this thing was just left in a supply depot nearby and was apparently not in running condition and just left to rot for years or something. Because we've never seen an armored car in Ukrainian service that looks that bad as this one. It has paint chipping off. And the next picture, when you see another Ukrainian armored car, but something interesting here is if you notice, there are large dark paint spots on this vehicle in places where a Russian Z would be. And that's a little questionable to me. Is this actually a Ukrainian armored car? Or did the Russians use this? I'm not really sure. It does look like it was a Ukrainian build, but considering that there's these large paint areas on the side where something has been done to the paint job, I would have to assume there was a Russian Z on it at some point. Moving on to the next picture, we can then see, another Ukrainian armored vehicle of some kind. I don't even know what this thing is called. But once again, notice the large blacked out areas on the side. Now, this does have the Ukrainian digital camo, so we do know that it was most likely in Ukrainian service at some point. But once again, in raggedy condition, not in the same cleanliness standard we usually see from the Ukrainians, and with these large black paint blobs on the side, which may suggest that this did have Russian Zs on it at some point. With that, we're now going to move on. Also, wait a minute, hang on. Yeah, you can actually clearly see the Z. I just saw someone say that in the chat. You can see the top of the Z up here, the zigzag where my mouse cursor is going, you can hardly see it, and then the bottom of the Z is down here. And so all of these have been being used by the Russians, and they've now pulled them out of service to show them off to the public for a propaganda flick. Also, this one has a deflated tire, so I don't even know how they got that one there. In the next picture, we can also see, a Ukrainian T-64. No, wait a minute, hang on. Yeah, that's a Ukrainian T-64 or something similar to that. And, they captured it. And also note the dark green paint on the front of the front glacis of this one, and also the front glacis of that one. These are the only, well, actually, there's a third tank to the left here. 3 tanks. They managed to capture 3 Ukrainian main battle tanks, and they're so desperate for armor, the Russian superpower that is supposed to be overwhelming the Ukrainians with just their might and their industrial ability alone, according to Russian propaganda, is so desperate for armor that they've had to start also repurposing Ukrainian main battle tanks, the 3 they were able to capture, back into Russian service, and you can clearly see, Z, pun intended, where they've painted over the Zs they had on them since they were now in Russian service. Also, they have a T-64 BV back there, and this one also looks to be a T-64 of a sort because of the wheel. Moving on into the next picture, we can then see the other T-64 BV that was just shown, that was to the left. So we can see that they managed to capture 3 tanks total, an SPG, a S23, I believe, the BMP again, and a couple of BMP ones. It looks like they were able to capture 5 of those. And notice the important thing, they're showing off all of the captured vehicles that they've gotten, because there's 5 BMPs here in a row, and then there was 3 T-64s in a row. And so they only managed to capture 1 Ukrainian BMP-2 and 5 BMP-1s. The Ukrainians have captured something like 120 Russian main battle tanks that we've been able to confirm, and that kind of gives you an idea of how badly the Russians are doing at this whole entire war, that they've not been able to capture really much, and this is probably everything that they've gotten across the entire war so far. And in the last picture, you can once again see the BMP-2 and the SPG. Not really an impressive collection. They're trying to repeat what the Ukrainians did with the destroyed Russian tanks in Kyiv, but this is, of course, with all of the captured vehicles that they've been able to get over the entirety of the war, and it's just sad. That's all I could really say, that the Russians are trying to make something out of that, and they're pulling everything they've got that they've captured from the Ukrainians, and it's not even much at that. It's probably about 24 vehicles, and that's it. Over 135 days, you only have 24 captured vehicles to show for it. Shame. With that, we're now going to move back down towards the front lines, towards Topolivka, where we can also see a destroyed T-72B3. And it appears that the Ukrainians were actually able to push the Russians back far enough that they got right up onto this destroyed T-72. And so, here's the video.
Вот, поймали очередного дауна, блядь. Опять, сука. Те же самые грабли очередной ебанулся. Группировочка Z, нахуй. Там БК детонирует опасно, блядь. Танчик называется у нас Киса. Есть там кто? Разбулся нахуй. Катки поотрывало.
A couple of wheels are missing. Well, not really missing. They're right beside the tank. We know where they are, but they're still not on the tank. When you see the back, I'm going to call that the mesh. I know it's got a different name. It's like slat armor or something like that. But we can see the mesh is a little bent, a little dented. I'm sure that can buff out with some armor all.
На связи Беркут. Что, братан, никого нету? На Механа посмотреть. Работаем, ребята, работаем.
Pretty nice little capture there, and it looks like it may be in largely running condition. It had not burned out. It was missing a few wheels, and we're not really sure how it was knocked out. It looks like it may have been taken out by a mine, but regardless of how it was wiped out, it is another Russian tank that has been knocked out of action, that the crew has abandoned, and now the Ukrainians are upon it, and they could possibly repurpose this and push it back into military service. Hopefully they can, but it's great to see that they're still knocking out Russian equipment and personnel in the Lysychansk area. Now, we're going to start moving to our last bits of frontline news, and then we're going to move to the news that really counts. The news that is changing the face of this war and maybe turning the tide for the Ukrainians here within the coming weeks. So hang with me through the frontline news that we have left. We have 2 pieces, and then we're going to get to the overall strategic situation and 2 massive pieces of news that I'm really excited to cover, actually, that the Ukrainians have actually been able to pull off today. So moving on down to the area of Berestove, we've seen that a Ukrainian drone has destroyed some more Russian infantry fighting vehicles in the area. And so, here's the video. We can see them showing us an unboxing video of the drone. Some bomblets, a pretty decent amount of them. Like a lot of them. We now see the drone on the lookout for some Russian vehicles, and it looks like it just found one right there. It's an MTLB, and it's not going to have a fun day as the egg-shaped bomblet falls on top of it. And we now get a rap song. It's like a music box. You hit it, and it starts playing a song. So I don't know if I'm going to mute this, because honestly, that was probably about the funniest thing I've ever heard. I didn't know it was going to do that. So we're actually just going to play the song, and if I get a copyright, I'll get a copyright.
Попав дзвінок, фейстайм, зв'язок, нормал, тече мальвін вдома. Поки ми караєм, йоу, караєм саних москалів.
Now the tank is brewing up. Well, the armored personnel carrier is brewing up. And we can see them go for another one.
Іди сюди, обалдел, потримай тут білий мел. Для твого тіла, москалі, ей, нахуй, русский мир, ей, москалі, ей.
Pretty impressive to see that this one drone knocked out 2 armored personnel carriers, MTLBs, and the reason why I didn't mute that music and I was willing to take a copyright, for it, is that it was a little funny sounding. So I hope y'all enjoyed that little song there, because it was certainly a bop, as the younglings call it these days, and I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be seeing that as the hit #1 song on the records down the road. So with that, it's nice to see that 2 more MTLBs have become crispy. And let's actually pull up, how much does an MTLB cost? How much does an MTLB cost? MTLB, maybe we can get a price here. You know, I feel like the price ought to be the default thing that everyone talks about with armored personnel carriers and tanks and such. This is always important to weigh in economic considerations when talking about a war. Oh, man, they're not going to give it to us? That's kind of lame. Let me see if I can find it somewhere else. Let's see. $100,000. So an MTLB costs $100,000 a piece, which is actually kind of expensive for that piece of garbage. So they knocked out $200,000. And just to put it into perspective, because I think this is really important, let's take a look at that drone again, if we can see it. Right there. It looks like a DJI Mavic of a kind. We'll just assume it's a DJI Mavic. And so let's type in price of a DJI Mavic. And we can see that a Mavic, by and large, a Mavic 2, is running around $800. So with $800 and about $30 in bomblets, you too can inflict $200,000 of damage on the Russian military, which is equivalent to a slightly used Lamborghini. So there you have it. It's very cost effective. In fact, if we do the math here, let's say that the drone and the bomblets it used was $900, just to round it up. So $200,000 divided by $900, that drone has inflicted 222.2 times the amount of monetary damage onto the Russians that drone cost. An incredibly cost-effective way to knock out the Russians without even denting your national military budget. So great to see, and of course, the music was a bop. If you would like to listen to that music, I would just like y'all to know that you can click on the link below in the description at the very bottom, and that will take you to the map I'm using today. Also, I forgot to mention this a while ago, but we did finally update our fundraiser link in the description to go to United 24. So I forgot to say that a while ago, but I would like y'all to know that now, because if you would like to support United 24 and have a quick link to get to it, it is in the description. It'll take you straight to the website. With that, we're now going to move down to the town of Yakovlivka, where we can see that the Danish M113s have finally arrived and the Ukrainians are pushing them into the service. We can see one here rolling by, and it's great to see the M113s back in service, back on the front lines. And so with that, of course, a wonderful thing to see, and huge props to the Danes who sent over this equipment to the Ukrainians, and the Danish hardly even have a military to speak of, as far as I know. But we'll pull that up real quick because I don't want to say anything that's wrong. I think they have a standing military of around 55,000 people, but, you know, I could be wrong with that number. Oh, actually, yeah, I'm correct. It's really close to around 50-something thousand, so that's pretty cool. And also, look, it's a picture of the Danish uniform, most likely, and it's not really a great reproduction of the uniform, but the Danish uniform in the late 1700s, most likely, considering the tricorner hat. That tricorner hat needs some work. A lot of work needs to be done with that reenacting kit right there, but the leggings are pretty on par. And then the modern Danish uniform. So, of course, huge credit to the Danish for sending that. They hardly have a military to speak of in terms of its size, and so sending over that kind of equipment is huge support as far as the Danish have been able to levy. And so, thanks a whole load to the Danish. And with that, we're now finally going to get to the juicy bits of news tonight that everyone's been looking for. That tide-turning news that is going to be showing that the Ukrainians might be getting the upper hand here for a couple of weeks or maybe even a very long while. In the town of Kharkiv today, we actually saw another ammunition depot get destroyed, and it seemed to be a somewhat sizable one. Sadly, I'm not going to be able to show y'all the video on that, and of course I always tell y'all, don't take Trust Me Bro as a source, but this did go to a video, so trust me bro, it was a big explosion. We're going to be moving down to the Donetsk area now, so that way I can kind of show y'all what that footage was supposed to show. Hopefully this one hasn't been deleted as well. And we're now going to go to the town of Shakhtarsk, behind Donetsk City in the Donetsk Oblast, where we've seen another major ammo depot on fire again. This is adjacent to Snizhny, which y'all may remember last week had another massive ammunition explosion within it. And so here's the video of this ammo dump also on fire. As you can see, a little bit of smoldering, a little bit of cooking. Of course, this kind of deep cooking gives it a lot of flavor and richness. We can see there that we are trying to smoke the meats as best as possible. And a little explosion there. When I say little, that's actually pretty large in scale. But another ammunition depot has exploded on top of the other major one up near Kharkiv today in the war as well. So, considering that two major ammunition depots were destroyed today, y'all know where I'm about to go with this. Right now, the Russians are at a difficult impasse. The army has completely exhausted itself on all fronts and is no longer able to pursue massive offensives of any sort. The offensive has stopped completely in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, with Putin officially declaring that those forces in that area will be going into a rest period and they will no longer be pursuing offensive actions, letting us know that those forces are exhausted. That's the same for the rest of the Russians across the entirety of the lines. And exhaustion doesn't necessarily mean that the men are tired. It really means that the supplies are worn out, and there's almost very little supplies for those units to work off of. And so the reason why these units have stalled is because they're trying to get them more supplies to continue on their offensive. The other fact is that the morale may have been so low, and they may have run the same units dogged during the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, that those units are literally on the verge of exhaustion, and the soldiers can hardly even continue on. And there may be mutinies that are occurring that may have led to this halt, so that way they can deal with disciplinary issues. There's a lot of things that could have happened that led to this pause in action that we don't know about, that the Russians are never going to let us hear. But my largest indicator is that the supply lines are breaking apart, and with the HIMARS in the area, of course, leading to most of the destruction and damage on these ammo depots, one can get the idea that the Russians may be seeing their supply lines collapse behind the lines, and they're trying to fix these issues, and this may be an opportune time for the Ukrainians to launch counterattacks, considering that Russian units are exhausted, low on supplies, and incredibly low on morale. So, of course, this is huge news to hear, and I'm looking forward to seeing if this will become the tide-changing aspect of the war so far, because we've known about these major ammunition depot attacks for around a week and a half. And with a week and a half going by since the first attack, and the damage keeps mounting, I'm assuming that those shockwaves are finally going to start hitting the front lines and supply line shortages, and they're going to start seeing that the units, like we have seen now, are going to grind to a halt because of a lack of supplies. So, of course, we're going to be looking into this situation and seeing if this does turn out to be the case, and I'm highly looking forward to it being so, because if it is, the Ukrainians might be back in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk fairly soon. So with that, we're going to move on out of the Donbas area and towards the village of Berdyanka. But before we get there, we're of course going to take a quick pause to answer three questions from the chat. And after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on to the remainder of the news in the Southern Front, as well as the speech from President Zelensky. And so with that, what do we have, Matthew?
All right, folks, it is now time for round 2 of the question segment. And first up, we have a $100 super chat from William Allen, one of our longtime channel legends, who says, "Here's for missing the last couple of days. I spent my birthday with my dad. Had a blast, and I hope everyone will take out time for the family. The generations before us have more knowledge than we could ever have. Whoop!"
And thank you so much for the generous support, William. It helps us out a huge deal. And also, welcome back. I'm glad you did have a fun time with your family. And I do have to agree, and especially as a message to a lot of my younger viewers under 30, because enough time hasn't passed for y'all. And I know that I'm kind of talking up to y'all because y'all are still older than me in age. But at the same time, it is always important to listen to older people that you may know. A lot of them have been around the block. And while some of them still don't look like they exert some of the things that they have learned, usually they're able to impart some pretty good wisdom and knowledge that you can't hear from elsewhere. And so I highly agree, it's incredibly important to hang out with family, and even if it's not family, it's always good to stick around old heads and listen to some of their stories, because sometimes you can reap things from them that you would have never learned elsewhere, and it all comes from their experience. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the massive support, William, and I'm glad that you did enjoy your time with your dad. Of course, it's always important to hang out with your family, and it's always important to make sure to look out for them. They, of course, put their heart and soul into raising each and every one of us. Hopefully, of course, there's an exception to that here and there, and so it's always good to make sure to show them that you love them and care for them, because you only have one family in the world, and you can only get it right once. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support, William.
And yes, I want to say thank you for the support, William, as always, and also happy belated birthday. And moving on to our next super chat, we have a $100 donation again from Ricardo Rivera, who says, "What do you guys think of reports of Ukrainian spies running havoc inside of Russia?"
I think that those may largely be true. I don't know if they're Ukrainian spies. I feel mostly that they are Belarusian or Russian saboteurs that may be conducting these attacks, but it seems to be largely true, because we see chemical plants catching on fire, ammunition factories catching on fire, and a large amount of industrial military industry catching on fire and burning to the ground. And so I would have to assume that it can't be raw negligence in every single one of those cases. It does have to be some kind of a saboteur or a sabotage attack. And so I would agree with that. It's the word spies, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but Ukrainian saboteurs or spies are definitely causing a lot of damage to the Russian war industry behind the lines, and that's the very small portion that's still operational. A large amount of it's just had to shut down. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, the massive support once again. And I hope that does answer the question. And to make sure I answer it in short form, yes, I do agree that they are causing a large amount of damage behind the lines. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the remainder of the news for the night. And after we cover that, along with a speech from Zelensky, which he made by train, we'll then move on into our final question segment of the night. And so, what is the last question of this segment?
All right, and before we move on to the last one of this segment, I want to recognize 2 donations left without comments. We have a very generous $100 donation from Running Bear and a $50 donation from Justice Ryan, and neither one of them leave comments, but they do leave their support. And what I'll have to do for you instead is, yeehaw!
You cut out on that one.
Yeehaw!
There we go. We got it that time.
There we go. Okay, yeah, I heard it in my headset that time. But thank you both for your support very much. I see people in the chat saying, thank goodness it's Friday. For some reason, today doesn't feel like Friday. I don't know why. It just feels like, I don't know, the middle of the week or something. I have no clue why. But thank you very much to both of you for your support. And I'm sure the Enforcer wants to add something to that real quick.
And I definitely would. Y'all's support helps this channel to keep running. And we thank you all so much for it. Because I'm totally serious when I say this, and I know I say it a lot, but without support from our viewers, our streams can't keep running, because it's the only thing that supports us right now is the support from our viewers. And so we rely on y'all. No pressure or anything, but we literally rely on y'all to run these streams. And so we're highly appreciative of y'all's massive amounts of support, because with it, we're able to keep these streams running and also look into the future, which I'm not going to say a lot about right now because we don't know a specific timetable, but gears are turning and the future may be bright. But y'all have to decide that for yourselves once y'all find out what I'm talking about. But I'm pretty excited about what we've got in store for the future. And so with that, thank you to both of y'all so much for the support. And I can't tell y'all how much it means to both Matthew and me. It means a lot, and I can tell, and Matthew can agree, it's the only thing that keeps this stream running and the only thing that supports us. And so thank you once again. And with that, we're now going to move on to our last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the news from around the front.
All right, and the last question of the segment goes to Khalid Shihadi, who puts in a $50 donation and says, thanks for all the support. Keep up the good work, and I appreciate the daily briefings from Khalid.
And I thank you so much for the support, of course, the big support, and I thank you so much for enjoying these streams. We, of course, try our best to get these out here as best as possible, and so we're always appreciative of everyone who's supporting us and helping us to keep this thing running, because, you know, it's a pretty long job, I gotta say. I spend about 9 hours a day on this, 10 hours. Today was a rough day for me, I'll tell y'all that, just to kind of let y'all in on my schedule for the day. I woke up, and I started working on something behind the scenes that I'm not going to talk about, but I started working on that pretty much ever since I woke up. Got a pretty decent ways through it. I was kind of happy with the end result, but there will be a little bit of tweaking for it. And then I heard that my mom needed buttermilk. And so I wanted to make sure to get her buttermilk. And so that took about 40 minutes to go and do that. Drive down the street to the grocery store, grab the buttermilk, and come back. Got the buttermilk, sat back down. And then I looked down at my phone and I found a reminder on it that I had a massive load of college work due today and I only had 2 hours to do it. And so then I had to sit down, speed read about 80 pages worth of books, and then also watch about 2 hours worth of lectures in about 30 minutes. So I had to kind of like speed through them. Then I had to take a quiz on the lectures, a quiz on the books, and then I had to sit there and write up an entire 500-word paragraph about certain historical stuff because it's in a history class. So I knocked that all out, which should have taken around 4 hours in 2 hours. And then at the end of all that, I went upstairs, ate supper for about 20 minutes, and then ran back downstairs and started working on this for the rest of the night because I spend about 9 hours on this per day. And so it's been a really busy day for me. But, you know, still, we put a lot of effort into these streams, and I'm just so glad. The whole point of me saying that was that it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort into these streams, and I'm so appreciative that everyone does enjoy the efforts I go through, Matthew goes through, to make sure that the stream is nice to watch and that the news is informative and fresh. And so thank you all once again for the support. Of course, it means a lot, and we're, of course, really busy here behind the scenes. And so with that, That is the end of this question segment. We'll now be moving on to the rest of the news for the night. And if you have sent in a super chat, do not fret. We will get to all of them before the end of the night. Just want y'all to know that, just in case y'all are new super chatter, so that way y'all don't think y'all have been left hanging. We will answer all of them and address every single one of them by the end of the night, and also answer live chat questions. You do not have to pay on these streams to get a question answered. We're not some kind of magical oracle. Really, the support is just to help us to keep running. But if you want to support us and ask a question, we'll definitely make sure to answer it. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Donetsk region, well, the Donbas in general, and we're now going to be moving up to Krasnodar, where today we've seen that the Ukrainians have gone around the entire country and they blacked out the highway signs. And this guy who was filming this video pointed this out. I thought it was pretty funny. And so here's the video.
This lovely highway. The German Autobahn is not any better. But check this out. All over Ukraine, all the directional signs are painted out. So you better know where you're going. That looks like a speed trap up ahead. Everybody just slowed down to 70 kilometers an hour on this highway. I know I'm going to get nailed in the next 300 kilometers because I'm eager to keep the air conditioning through the wing windows going.
So pretty funny video. I didn't know that they were actually going and doing old things that people used to do back in the 40s and the 1910s and stuff, which is switching around road signs and turning them where they're facing in wrong directions, or painting over what they're saying and where you're going. I don't really think that matters all too much in the era of GPS, but then again, the Russians are backwards and they may not all have GPSs. We kind of know that a little bit because they did get lost at the beginning of the war. And so blocking out these road signs may be a huge help to retreating Ukrainian forces, because it's going to confuse the Russians if this is anywhere near the front lines. And also, it's going to make it so much more difficult for Russian spies and saboteurs to travel around the country without a GPS, because they're going to have no idea where they are, and they're going to have to pull over and most likely ask for directions. And if y'all did not know, in World War II, if you pulled over in Britain and asked for directions, you almost immediately got arrested, because that gave the British police a pretty good idea that you were most likely a spy, because everyone in Britain, the police's logic, should know where they are because they've lived there almost their entire lives. So a pretty interesting little historical tidbit. And we can see the Ukrainians exercising that same kind of mindset here in 2022, which is really crazy to see. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of this bit of news, and we're now going to be moving down to the Dnipro-Zaporizhia area. President Zelensky has already made a sighting down here weeks ago as he visited soldiers on the front line, both near the Lysychansk area and also near the Zaporizhia area. And he's now come back down here and he's visited again. And here's a video of Zelensky once again on the front lines reviewing troops, handing out citations and medals, and also assessing the actual situation on the field. This is something you'll never see Putin do, but Zelensky is willing to put his neck out on the line and his safety in jeopardy to make sure that this war can be fought and won as best as possible on the Ukrainian side. I have to say, this is a huge leap for Zelensky and a very dangerous thing for them to do. The Ukrainians can only guarantee his security so much until he is put in danger, and being this close to the front line, even 20 miles from it, is an incredibly risky move. But here's the video. You can see Zelensky here apparently looking at a computer screen and reviewing information with the generals. He does appear to be completely exhausted. And one thing that's really interesting to me is that you always imagine that world leaders are large, like tall, but Zelensky actually looks kind of short. But then again, there's a lot of people out there that are short. It's just always interesting to me whenever you see world leaders standing amongst normal people. You always imagine them to literally be larger than life. But Zelensky is just a average-sized or a little bit of a shorter guy. Maybe he's got some Napoleon genes in him, who knows? But while tired, he's still putting his maximum attention and maximum effort and brain power into trying to make sure that the troops' morale stays high and this war can be fought and won. And you have to give credit to a leader for putting themselves through so many rigors like Zelensky has to make sure that they can win this war.
Хочу вас всіх привітати, подякувати за вашу щоденну велику героїчну роботу. Дякую за те, що ви живі. Живі, значить, будете захищати
William, that's true. Not everyone can be the Gaul. The Gaul was a giant.
Я хотів би вшанувати пам'ять ваших загиблих, ваших побратимів, які назавжди залишаться в історії, в нашій історії нашої держави, в історії вашої бригади, в історії цієї війни.
We can hear Zelensky giving an address. Sadly, we don't have the translation. You can see them all taking off their hats. Most likely an honor to the fallen.
Дуже дякую. Дякую за те, що захищаєте наш суверенітет і наші сім'ї. Ми бажаємо вам здоров'я.
We can now see him handing out medals and citations. Of course, recognizing the frontline heroes that are keeping this war going. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Okay, this is crazy. Now, if this was Putin, he wouldn't even get near them, and if he did get near them, they would be in a hospital in a bed, or they would be standing near a bed with absolutely no combat gear on. That's the closest that Putin has ever gotten to a Russian soldier during this entire war. Zelensky has just given a medal to a man with a live AK on his shoulder. And some of y'all might be saying, how do you know it's live? Also, we're going to point something else out here in a second. But how do you know it's live? And it's because after this man gets the medal, he turns and the magazine is still in the AK. If this man was a Russian spy, he could have leveled that rifle right on Zelensky's chest and shot him. But that's how much faith and trust that Zelensky has in the common Ukrainian soldier, is that this man was able to bring a live AK within feet of the president and receive a medal. That says a lot about Zelensky's faith that he has in the soldiers. And I have to point something out here, because this whole entire war I've been thinking of trying to get Zelensky on this stream, and I don't know how possible that would be, but considering he did get on CNN a while ago, I think he would be more than happy to hop on here. I just have to figure out how to reach out to him. But we can see that they got a Discord, because there's a little Discord sign back there. So they do have a Discord, wherever this may be. This may just be the unit's Discord. This may not be Zelensky's Discord, but the Ukrainians are using Discord, so that's important to know. And that does let us know that he may be able to come on the stream. They do have the knowledge about Discord to use it, so pretty interesting to see right there. That AK did not have a magazine in it. We did see that. That AK did have a magazine in it. He's handing out medals, and every single soldier, almost, has a live gun. Pretty wild to see. We actually saw a lot of more interesting things in the background than we did in the actual video. The live weapons, of course, incredibly important. And just to see someone say they may have checked the guns and made sure they're not live. And they may have. At the same time, they may have not. Who knows? That's something that we're not really sure about. But the second thing is that we do see that they use Discord, which is giving me hope that we might be able to get Zelensky on here in the future. So with that, of course, great to see that Zelensky is on the front lines and still recognizing Ukrainian soldiers for their valor and their actions on the front lines, because that's incredibly important to do. And seeing the leader of your country, the man you're supposed to have faith in leading you to success and victory, is always incredibly important and always a huge morale booster. So, of course, great to see that Zelensky does care for the soldiers and is making sure to go down there and visit the front lines occasionally. And with that, we're now going to be moving on out of the Zaporizhia area of the front line and across the Dnipro River area to the Kherson Finger. We always get at least one bit of news from the Kherson Finger every day, and today is no exception. We saw today an M777 in action and knocking out... Wait a minute, hang on, this is a copy and paste video, sorry. Apparently the link was repeated. We're now moving out of the Popasta Finger, yeah, on that sad bombshell there, that it's a repeat link, which is kind of sad. I don't know why it does that every once in a while, but it does. And we're now going to move towards the area of Inhlitz, where today we saw a Russian soldier pretty much lead a Ukrainian drone to their camp. Apparently the soldier didn't know he was being followed by a drone, but the Ukrainian drone just followed him to the source and managed to wipe him out as well as his camp, at least a little bit. We can see him wandering down towards his camp on this little road, and the drone's just patiently watching him. And there he goes into the tree line, and he's now amongst his camp, which kind of points out where it is. We can now see the Ukrainian artillery coming down on this area. And no stone goes unturned. And Ukrainian drones are always watching. And so for my Russian viewers, just in case if there are any, which I don't think there are, that are pro-Russian, look at this and just remember that no matter where you are, someone's always watching. So with that, that's the end of the video, and it is great to see that the Ukrainians are not always using drones to drop bomblets. They're still using drones as artillery observers, and apparently doing a pretty good job with them at that. They hit that little camp inside the tree line dead on. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of news from the Kherson area, where behind the lines, we've seen the Russians redo the destruction of an S-300, this time trying not to win the Darwin Awards, but it looks like in the process they may have gotten really close to it. And so with that, here's the video. Not really much to add here, so I'm just going to let y'all see it. So it blew up, obviously, but this time they weren't as close as they were last time. So it looks like, you know, they kind of learn a little bit. You know, they click together the two brain cells they got in their heads, and eventually the synapses fire, and they learned something. And apparently they learned that the fire's hot, don't get too close. So another S-300 destroyed. Apparently these are from well early into the war, and the Russians are now destroying them for propaganda purposes, from what we can tell. But that's all we know. And this time, sadly, they didn't win the Darwin Award. With that, we're now going to be moving towards the front lines, where we have two bits of frontline news. Starting off in the area of Mushakivka, we've seen a firefight take place from the Ukrainians and the Russians. This perspective is from a Ukrainian soldier's helmet cam footage. And so, without further ado, it is a lengthy video, but it is showing the Ukrainians in action near the Kherson area. And so, without further ado, here's the firefight. You hear the firefight's pretty intense, and of course someone had to put music over it. So we're going to mute that for a second, and we can now see artillery raining in over the area where these soldiers are fighting. We can now see an interview with one of them. We now see them walking down the street, moving towards what appeared to be a bus stop and a destroyed house. They're now crossing the street. We can see a large explosion in the background. Not sure what that is, but it may be an ammunition depot.
Подалі, щоб вони не могли можливості бачити, куди вони накривають, які райони, де що, куди ведуть вогонь, і відповідно і відсунути далі, щоб їхня гради, СЗО там і ствольна артилерія не могла в такій кількості вже, виходить, по самому Харкову вести вогонь.
Ми заходили з лісу трьома групами, там приблизно плюс-мінус 20 чоловік в групі було. Це не забуваємо окна. Біля кожної групи був закріплений кугар.
We now see them moving down a forest path.
ДШК 12,7. І, в принципі, ми ще туди вставили в бойниці німецький кулемет МГ-42. Рухалась броня, за бронею йшли бійці. І таким...
We now see them clearing out some areas, and we now got dog water music playing again.
Бойові зіткнення з противником.
Artillery just flew over them. We can hear the whistling of the shell. Once again, the dog water music is ramping up. Also, notice this guy's got some kind of an M4. I don't know if he uses the 7.62 rounds. Don't really, I'm going to be honest with y'all, I don't really care. It's an M4 AR kind of platform, and so that's all that matters to me. It doesn't really matter the caliber. So it's an M4 in my opinion.
Так і знешкоджений ворог.
Можете розповісти, як це виглядало? Тобто, я так розумію, вони все-таки чіплялися за населений пункт.
Так, вони в населеному пункті, вони вже там давно, і вони закріпилися.
You now see some Russian waste, I guess you could
У
say.
них були укрепрайони невеликі, у них був там свій штаб. І коли ми наступали, то, звичайно, було витіснити важкувато з-за того, що коли люди закопані в землю, то їх тяжко звідти вибити.
Крайні підтягуємо.
Ми коли зайшли на одну вулицю, передвинулись трошки від опушки ліса, будемо говорити, і десь, мабуть, вже третій, четвертий будинок. Тобто вони сиділи не в перших будинках, а чуть-чуть далі, третій, четвертий будинок, звідти почав по нам вестися снайперський вогонь. Там було десь декілька пострілів, але коли вони зрозуміли, що їм заходять вже в спину другі підрозділи по другій вулиці, відповідно, були змушені відійти, вони почали тікати. Відповідно, вийшли на другу групу, яка по них почала вести вогонь. Тоді були взяті і один був поранений, і один полонений зразу взяли.
I see them taking a prisoner. They have the face blurred out.
Звідки самі? Україна. Звідки самі? Звідки самі?
Вони відстрілювалися, і коли вже вони понесли...
We can see some we'll call it Fana. It was on the ground near that person.
Потім вже військовослужбовець...
Can't ever really say what it really is because of YouTube censor reasons.
Одного так затримали, а ще...
I've seen an abandoned Russian civilian car marked with Z's in the background behind the soldier.
Бо зайшли в їхній штаб, вони просто не очікували, що ми зайдемо. І все, в нього не було шансів, там ніяких нічого, ні відстрілюватись, ні відійти.
Потім, коли ми їх трошки видали вже, виходить, з населеного пункту, вони от тікали, виходить, при відступі вони замовили артилерію. Тобто почався мінометний обстріл. Коли вже якби постріл, трошки притихло все, одна з груп передвинулася, тобто подивитися, що там в населеному пункті. Коли вони вийшли, то їм на допомогу, виходить, під'їхав танк з піхотою, тому вирішили відійти.
We can now see a tank and soldiers mounting it, but we don't know whose side that tank was on.
Зрозуміло, що десь тут в лісі хтось є, вони почали цей ліс відпрацьовувати. Тому була команда дана на відход, і ми відтягнулися далі, поки вони працювали по лісу. Коли на другий день ми зранку знову зайшли зачищати, то зрозуміло, що вони от тоді, як виходить, ми їх...
Also, to pause the interview real quick, I will say I saw a great one in the chat for what that stuff was. Still not going to say it on stream. But I saw someone say it's the soldier spilled wine, and so we're going to be calling that stuff red wine from now on. Just so y'all know, the code words are going to be red wine, so that way I don't get in trouble with YouTube censors. You know, I'm not really into terminology or trying to come up with cool slang terms for anything. Usually they just happen organically. But with that, if I do say that on stream, I'm scared that a YouTube censor is going to come by and age restrict this stuff. And so that stuff that y'all saw, y'all know what it is. It's red wine to us, so...
Видавили, вони вже більше назад не поверталися, вони вже теж не ризикнули, тому що не знали, зайняті їхні позиції, не зайняті. Вони просто дали можливість остальним відтягнутися і відійти.
Pink mist, jeez. It wasn't pink mist.
Коли ми відтіснили вже орків з населеного пункту, була будівля, ми просто заходили в будівлю, і там знаходився цей полонений їхній. Його просто звільнили, відкрили, випустили. Громадянин України, на вигляд, 30 років десь там було, худий, зневоджений такий, знаєте. Накормили, напоїли, обігріли. Було тяжко людям, бо коли ми вже заїхали сюди, видно було, що люди плакали, зустрічали. Це настільки приємно, це такі емоції, які я вам не можу передати. І коли ти бачиш таких людей, ти розумієш, що це все робиться не просто так.
Orc gravy. Y'all are coming up with worse and worse stuff. I'm hardly able to focus on this man talking right here because y'all are coming up with crazy stuff. Someone said Merlot, that's a pretty good one.
Так, тут так.
Now we got the Battlefield 4 menu music playing. We can see some repeat footage from before. They're now getting back out into the street again and pointing down the road. Large explosion again. And now we see some new footage where they're walking down a sidewalk on the side of the road. We see something that appears to be a Ukrainian flag or some kind of rags that are blue and yellow on the back of this man's plate carrier. Pretty nice, actually. I like that. That's a nice little addition. Oh, man. Everyone keeps on saying orc gravy. I think that might be the better one. I think we might switch it from red wine to orc gravy because honestly, I'm getting a pretty good laugh out of that.
Ми добре бачили місця прильотів, там добрячі клуби диму. Але нічого, наче всі живі-здорові, виїжджаємо.
And with that, that is the end of that video, and we got a pretty good idea of what Ukrainian forces are doing in the Kherson area. With that, we're now going to be moving down to the western side of Kherson, where we've also seen the 36th Marine Brigade in action as well, trying to help out and pushing the Russians out of the Kherson area. And so, here's the video. Of course, more music. I don't know why they have to throw music on everything. It's not the Ukrainians, it's always like an American Bob or someone who gets a hold of this and he's like, you know what would make this so much better is music. Why? It doesn't. But we can see the Ukrainians moving around in this truck. Looks like they are a small recon team. There's only 3 of them. And we can see them setting up the drone. So it's a drone team. It's not a well, maybe a recon group or an artillery observer unit, but they are setting up a drone. I'm not really sure what kind yet, but it has some massive landing gear legs to try and protect that camera. Let's see if there's still music.
Не може, а взагалі допомагає знаходити орків та добре їх знищувати.
Music again. Now they're going out into the open field to give the drone a little bit of breathing room, not breeding room. It's not making a new drone, it's trying to destroy Russians, so it's not really breeding. That's the opposite. Now the drone's lifting off and going to meet its destiny, which is destroying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of Russian equipment for the mere cost of an $18,000, maybe $2,000 drone with a couple of $100 worth of bomblets. Now let's see if the music kicks in again.
Ми співпрацюємо з усіма, тому що ми всі побратими. Взагалі працюємо з нашою дуже гарною артилерією, яка працює на 2С1. І вона дуже гарно веде кабанчики.
They are certainly artillery observers.
Рве на шматки. Також ми працюємо ще з курою 38. І він взагалі ювелір. Також працюємо з 3 топорами. Це снайпери наші. І все відбувається дуже-дуже досить гарно, тому що оркам це не подобається.
Now you see another question being posed to.
Чи я коригую, або ми побратими коригують. Ми працюємо в одній, як це, ланці, мабуть, так, це буде так звучати. Ми одне ціле, тому працюємо разом. Артилерія і ми. Він наносить відразу після виявлення орків, місце знаходження їх, відразу наносить координати їх, місце знаходження для наших побратимів, які працюють в артилерії.
Oh man, it's more music. Alright, we meet the Vietnam-esque sounding music. They're back in the truck. They're back on the road. They're taking off away from the wheat field. Now we can see something else up on the screen. In Ukrainian, of course. I can't really read. I can read it, but I don't understand what it says.
Я просто не розбираюся. МТЛ може бути, може якась беха. Соответственно, вот. Мини-городок. Тут, скорее всего, здесь есть разъезды. Здесь вы отсюда заезжает танк, выезжает на поле. Вот эти две цели. Вот эта цель, именно вот эта, находится вот здесь. Вот это вот оно. Вот закупленная техника. Это второй компаньон. Вот БТР здесь.
Well, you now hear the microwave in the background, and the pizza rolls are ready.
Там еще будут с другой стороны ступеньки. А вот смотрите, сейчас я вам покажу. Опа! Насыпай! 6!
Now the artillery is hitting dead on, we can hear, because of the jubilant celebration of the Ukrainians.
Это второй пошел. Перелет, видишь? Хорош, сука. 100 минус стоп, видел? Меняй аккумулятор срочно на взлет, потому что надо поменять матрас. После на счете. Вот выход сверху.
That's the end of the video, but we did get a pretty good idea of what the 36th Separate Marine Brigade is doing near the area of Kherson, and hopefully with those kinds of drone activities, forward observations, and artillery barrages, they can hopefully get the momentum to finally push the Russians back into Kherson City and then across the Dnipro River. With that, that is actually all the news we have from the Southern Front today. With all that news in mind, we have not heard of any Ukrainian advances in the area as of today. But based off the amount of action we're seeing, we can only assume that by momentum alone, the Ukrainians will eventually start to cover more ground again, and it's only a matter of time until we actually see the Ukrainians on Kherson City. With that in mind, we're now going to go up to Kyiv to listen to the speech from President Zelensky. And so, without further ado, here's the speech from President Zelensky made today on a train traveling somewhere from the Dnipro area back to Kyiv.
Здоров'я, шановні українці, сьогодні весь день працював на виїзді в Дніпрі та в області, в Кривому Розі, був на передових позиціях нашої оборони на Дніпропетровщині, заслухав доповіді командирів, подякував від імені всіх українців, нашим хлопцям, дівчатам, які тримають область. Вручив золоту зірку Герою України підполковнику Олегу Руцевичу, командиру танкового батальйону. Завдяки його особистій хоробрості, його підрозділ без втрат вийшов з оточення і в бою знищив російську диверсійну групу. Дуже сильна людина, відчувається. Відвідав в Дніпрі знамениту лікарню імені Мечникова, щоб особисто подякувати нашим особливим героям, усім лікарям, медичним сестричкам, які щоденно з 24 лютого і з 2014 року рятують наших військових, цивільних після поранень. Вони надзвичайно успішні на своїй передовій і подарували другий день народження, зберегли життя для тисяч наших людей. Вручив державні нагороди нашим захисникам, які відновлюються після поранень. Я справді дуже вдячний за всі теплі слова, які почув сьогодні в Дніпрі, почув на передовій. Дякую вам, перш за все. Сьогодні звернувся до парламенту Словенії кожного дня і за будь-яких обставин на зовнішньополітичному фронті. Працюємо по максимуму. І, до речі, це було вже 24-те звернення до парламентів країн ЄС. І перше, яке зроблено поблизу передової. Сподіваюся, що і 3 інші країни ЄС відчують, що ці звернення не про політику, про захист нашої свободи, спільної, до речі. А отже, ми прийдемо до того, що одного дня я зможу сказати, що всі 27 парламентів Євросоюзу чують боротьбу за свободу краще, ніж будь-які російські маніпуляції. Також провів усі необхідні наради з керівниками Дніпропетровщини в цілому і Криворізького району, зокрема, як військовими, так і цивільними. Безпека, економіка, соціальні питання. Посадовці повинні робити не просто все можливе, а значно більше, ніж навіть можливо, щоб і в таких воєнних умовах гарантувати людям нормальний рівень життя. Повертаюсь в столицю. Звичайно, хочу сказати ще 2 речі. Привітав сьогодні главкома Залужного з днем народження, побажав йому здоров'я, побажав йому і всім нам найважливішого – перемоги. Дякую за службу. І завтра, 9 липня, фактично вже після заходу сонця, сьогодні мусульманська громада починає відзначати Курбан-Байрам. Це особливе свято, яке вчить жертовності і спрямовує людей на добрі вчинки. Я хочу привітати зараз усіх мусульман України і світу та побажати, щоб панування миру відновилося, а всіляке зло завжди програвало. І що швидше, то краще. Цього особливо очікує кримсько-татарський народ. Я вірю, що настане рік, коли будемо вітати одне одного у вільному Криму. Курбан, Байрам-ан-Низ, Хайрли, Ве, Мубарік. Олсу. Вітаю з благословенним святом Курбан-Байрам. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky for the night. And speaking of birthday wishes, which he did talk about on his speech, we would also like to extend a happy birthday to Operator Starsky, whose birthday was today. Operator Starsky has been on our stream multiple times before on Sundays, helping us to raise funds for nonprofits operating in Ukraine, and he has become a good friend of ours. He hasn't been on stream lately, but we still do talk to him whenever I get the time, which is actually really rare, but still, happy birthday to Operator Starsky, and if you watch this later on, Starsky, just want you to know, we're still thinking about you over here, and we're wishing you the best. And so with that, we have now reached the end of tonight's news. Thank you all so much for watching once again. If you were here for the news segment alone, this is the end of the stream for you. We will be moving into the question segment here and answering everyone's super chats and also answering as many live chats as we can. But if you were here for news alone, then that concludes our news segment. And so with that, if you would like to stick around, we will be answering as many questions as we can. And so without further ado, we're now moving into the question segment. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we are now moving into our final question segment of the stream. And before we move into it, I just want to say thank you to everybody for their support. And also, if you would please be so kind as to hit that like button, it tells YouTube that we're doing a good job. And it also tells us that we're doing a good job as well. And we appreciate it every time you smash that like button. So up first, we have a $50 super chat from Walter A. Lakota Jr., one of our longtime channel viewers, who says, "Aloha at the Enforcer and Enforcer Matt. Check your Discord server, as I've sent you photos of the USNS Loyal."
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and also, it's great to hear from you, and I thank you so much for enjoying this channel. I will go and check out the Discord, but I just want everyone to know that, you know, like when I went over that schedule earlier about how my day has gone, I just want everyone to know it's really hard for me to respond to DMs or check out the Discord server often, just because I have a very small amount of time. I will make sure to check it out, but if you always want to show something to me, make sure to reach out to me on a personal DM on Discord and send it to me, but also make sure to be very conservative in doing so, because if I just tell everyone to do that, then I get 100 DMs a day, and I'm trying to go through them and address them all, and I hardly have time to do that, so I just want to keep that in mind, but I will go and check that out, and I thank you so much for sharing that with us, which we will take a look at after the stream. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and thank you once again for the wonderful support. It helps us out a huge load, and we're always appreciative of everyone who helps this stream to keep on running. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $25 super chat from Mech15, who says, "What's your take on how fast the Russians can resupply their blown-out ammo depots, and how far away do you think the munitions are coming from?"
Considering that it took the Russians about 2 to 3 months to prepare for this war and start it, I would assume that it will most likely take them weeks to position those ammo depots and also rebuild their ammo caches if they even have enough. I feel very confident that they do have enough, so I would assume it would take them weeks to rebuild an ammo depot like that, But then again, that's entirely reliant on the Ukrainians not striking that depot and the process of it being made. So it could be a matter of weeks, it could be a matter of months. They may never be able to rebuild the depots, depending on how consistently the Ukrainians will keep on hitting Russian supplies behind the lines. So my answer to that question in brief would be most likely weeks at the best, maybe a month or two at worst. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. Once again, that's just based off of my knowledge and my guesstimations, so take it with a grain of salt. I could be wrong, and while I never really end questions like that anymore, always keep in mind that these are just my estimations, and I'm not an expert on everything, but I feel like that would be a pretty good ballpark answer to answer that question with. And so thank you once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $20 super chat from Jasam Craffen, who says, please join me and we will all drink to the dead. The innocent and the brave, here's to them. And with that said, let's move on to the next nipple bottle.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And you know, of course, I don't drink. Matthew and me don't drink, actually. So whenever I say anything as a joke about alcohol, we have actually never drank before to know. But I do thank you very much for the support. And in the future, once this war is over, I do think that there should be a toast to all of the soldiers that lived, the soldiers that died, and all of the unfortunate civilians that were caught in the middle. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. And with that, now that I've said that about 3 times, we're on to the next question.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Leaf Spring Army, who says, good job predicting the importance of large warehouses on the stream several weeks ago. These strikes are testament to their importance, and Russian pause equals Ukrainian hunting.
And I do agree, and I also thank you so much for being very attentive on these streams and seeing that the prophecy did come true. I said, just in case if you all weren't around weeks ago, I said weeks ago that large buildings are going to be where the Russians stockpile ammo. And I'm going to give you all a good example of how that's true. If we go to Shizny, which is down here, and we look at Shizny, let's look for a large building. Boom. Large building, garage depot. But there's got to be a better place to put it, because those are multiple buildings. There's got to be a big complex around here somewhere that you could throw in ammo. Right here. This would be a great place for ammo. Let's find another spot. Any of these industrial buildings right here, you could probably use this larger building compound right here for a fine supply depot. You could also use this large, massive warehouse here that looks like it's been abandoned as a supply depot as well. And so you can see that the large buildings around Shizny, Snizny, which is where a supply depot was actually destroyed, would be conducive to an ammo depot. And of course, the larger buildings are needed because you have to have some kind of simplicity to the matter. If you can't have trucks trying to figure out on the fly which one of these houses on this row of houses in this neighborhood is which amount of ammo in, that would be too complicated. That would slow things down way too much. It'd be way too inefficient. And so it is always important to note that the large buildings will always be used as ammo storages. And people back, you know, and every once in a while, whenever I say stuff like that as an estimation, people in the chat, very small amount, but there's always a few, will sit there and say, oh, so what, you're going to destroy every building, every large building behind the occupied lines? You know, like, what are you, like, that's crazy, man. And then you find out and realize that every single large building becomes an ammo depot. And so it's always funny to me that I make guesstimations like that, and they do turn out to be right. And one thing that is really crazy to me is that basic training lasts 10 weeks here in the United States. And I believe job training also lasts for about the same amount of time after you go through basic. And so I've almost gone through, doing these streams, basic and job training and the amount of time I've had to cover this war. Of course, not as rigorous and not as mentally draining in its own way as going through basic, but at the same time, I've had to sit here and cover this war for so long that I might as well be as well versed on this war and how it's going as a soldier who's gone through his basic training and his job training for his MOS. So with that, that's actually crazy to me that we're coming up on that landmark at this point. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for pointing out the relevance of me saying that earlier, because now it's certainly come to be true. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and up next we have a $20 super chat from David Bacco, who says, I love what you guys are doing. It's important, you guys, and Slava Ukraine. And here we go. And a big yeehaw!
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy what we're doing. I try and put, of course, as much effort as I can into this, almost to the point of exhaustion sometimes. I've actually been running the stream tonight with a massive headache. I bet none of y'all have known that, and I usually try and keep that stuff under the covers, but right now, my eyeballs feel like they're popping out of their sockets, and so I thought I would tell y'all, just in case if my energy starts to reflect that here in a second. But thank you so much for the support once again, and enjoying what we do. I make sure to do it for all of y'all and for Ukraine as well, as the Sunday fundraisers always manage to raise a decent amount of funds in support of Ukraine. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to say, I've seen a lot of people in the chat say that they're also feeling tired today for some reason. I don't know why. Today was just one of those days that I couldn't quite wake up either. Coffee doesn't work, and it looks like the Enforcer is that way too today. So it's just one of those days. I guess it's the 4th of July weekend that just happened. Probably wore everybody out a little bit, the sun and the heat and everything. But yeah, just a strange day. But anyways, moving on to the next super chat, we have a $20 donation from Ruben Coolidge, who says, HIMARS stands for High Mobility Anti-Russian System. Thank you once more for another edition of the news, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for enjoying this next edition of the news. Of course, 6 days a week, every week until the war ends as of right now. And I've got to say, that's probably about the smartest thing I've ever heard anyone say as what the abbreviation for HIMARS stands for. And if it is, the prophecy came true, because it's now an anti-Russian system. And so thank you once again for the support and the clever interpretation of what HIMARS stands for, because that was actually a pretty good one. I like that. I actually got a pretty big smile when I heard that one. And so thank you once again for the support, helping out this channel and helping us to keep running, and also the nice little joke you put in right there, because that was a pretty smart one. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
All right. And up next, we have a super chat from Duncan VR, who puts in a $19 donation. And once more, Duncan is going to put me through the ringer. He says, when Putin talks, all I hear is sheep noises. Bah, bah, bah. When his generals talk, I hear pig.
I want to try that one real quick, the sheep one.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, I'm done. Moving on to the next one.
And Duncan, he absolutely did that a hell of a lot better than I would have done it. So there we go. And the rest of the super chat says, when his generals talk, I hear pigs. Oink, oink, snort. Here is more pizza funds, spam, and pineapple. Slava Ukraine. He says, Matt to impersonate animal sounds. LOL. Don.
Well, I think I actually took over for Matthew on the sheep one, because I actually did that earlier today, waiting for Matthew in the call, because we actually have a call that runs for about 5 minutes before the stream starts. And so so I sat there, and one thing that I'll let y'all in on it, what we do before the stream starts. We join a call at 9:55 Eastern time, and once Matthew gets in, I go, hello? And then he goes, hello? And then I say, Totoro, and then he goes, Totoro, and then we just sit there and do that until the stream starts, literally. That's what we do. I don't know how that became our, getting ready routine and, our hype up, but somehow Totoro, which I think is some kind of a character from a Japanese anime, but I've never really watched it before, that's become our hype up. So, just letting y'all know what we do behind the scenes. And so we're actually pretty used to making noises, because he wasn't on the call tonight. He went off to go do something. And so I made sheep noises in the microphone until he came back, so that way he knew I had hopped on the call. So with that, I hope y'all found that tidbit a little interesting and Totoro. And so with that, we're on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support, Duncan. And I hope you enjoyed Matthew and my animal impersonations.
All right, and up next we have a $15 super chat from Krister Peterson and a $10 donation from Greg Wilson. Neither of them leave comments, but thank you very much for your support of the channel, and thank you both for watching for a very long time, as I know you have been here for quite some time. And next up we have a $10 super chat from Jay Byrne, who says, thanks for all you both do. Put this into the coffee fund, LOL, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the support, and I thank you so much for supporting our coffee fund. Of course, we do drink Busy Nitro Cold Brew, and it's pretty good stuff. Tastes like dirt water, though, but it gets the job done, and that's what really counts. You know, it doesn't matter if it's beautiful, if it's tasty, or anything like that. If it gets the job done, it gets the job done. And so, thank you once again for the support and the coffee fund, and we're going to make sure to put that towards more Busy. Not trying to get a sponsorship with them or anything, but it does get the job done. And so with that, I hope that does address the question, and thank you once again for supporting the coffee fund. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from MJ, who says, I read today that Russia's only tank producer has laid off people and is no longer producing or repairing tanks. Have you heard about that?
I think I did. That was really early on in the war. We heard that the T-90 manufacturers, or at least the T-90 upgraders who were taking the T-72s and upgrading them into T-90s, did shut down very early into the war because they ran out of all of the materials they needed to produce new T-90s. So in that instance, I would say yes, I have heard about things similar to that. If you're talking about recently, I have not. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I wouldn't doubt it considering that the sanctions have pretty much relegated the Russians to producing the simplest of items, much like AKs and, you know, ammunition for AKs, and very simple ammunition like high explosives, because making high explosive filler is not difficult, and making the shells for them isn't really difficult either. But with that, hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question. I hope I answered that one pretty well. I know it was kind of a little bit of a brief answer, but I feel like it answered it pretty well. So if it didn't, please make sure to clarify so that way I can elaborate a little bit more. But thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from Smarzig, who says, what are the chances of a Leaf Spring Army trip to Ukraine when the dust settles? I would really love to go.
I thank you so much for the support, but the thing is that a Leaf Spring Army trip, I don't know how possible that could be, because I don't know how this is going to be going by that time, and also, you know, I don't really know. I mean, like, you know, it's kind of a weird thing. We did throw around months ago the idea of going over there and covering the news there. But, you know, we ended up not doing that due to, you know, obvious safety reasons. We could get killed over there kind of easy, you know, because there's a war going on. So we never went over there. And I don't know if we would make a giant trip out of it. We would most likely just go over there on our own, if we did. So I don't really know if it'd be possible or not. I'm just going to have to wait and see as we get closer and closer to the end of the war. And we'll know when the war comes around, because peace negotiations usually go on for about a month or two once a war starts coming to a close. And so we'll have about a 1 month to a 2 month countdown to when this war will end. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I don't really know if we're going to be doing that or not. But keep your fingers crossed, because it might be on the table, although I'm not making any promises on that one. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, are you seeing the 100 ways to cook orc in the live chat right now?
Yes, I am. Vienna
yes,
orc,
sweet
and sour
orc and beans. Yes, sweet sour orc.
Canned orc, steamed orc with garnish, deep fried orcs in a blanket. Oh my god, dude, they've been doing this for like an hour. I looked over at this earlier, and I was trying not to comment on it, but I was almost about bust out laughing reading it, and I'm glad you noticed that too, because I thought I was crazy.
Yes, I've been entertained by that for like the past 30 minutes. I'm not sure exactly what started it, but it's hilarious, and I love reading it. But anyways, moving on before we get too sidetracked. Next up, we have a $10 super chat from Telmed, who says, if I had the money, I'd open a recycled steel plant in Ukraine.
That's actually a really smart idea, and I bet that a lot of businesses are going to be going into Ukraine. One, because a lot of industries have been destroyed there, so there will be a very open labor force there that will be willing and more than happy to pick up jobs at anywhere that will give them one. And so I bet you there's going to be a little bit of an industrial boom after this war. Even if the West gives a decent amount of support, a lot of it or none of it, a lot of companies are going to move to Ukraine because it's going to be very beneficial and cost efficient for them. Although that does sound a little crass, that's most likely going to be how it turns out. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I do agree it would be a smart idea to open up a recycled steel plant over there, because there's going to be plenty of it to go around, along with a lot of other composites that a lot of people don't think about. There's going to be loads of aluminum. There's going to be loads of just anything and everything you can imagine. A lot of composite armor too, and so if anyone's in the market for some old composite armor, that'll also be out there as well. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I do have to say that that is actually a really smart idea, and I think a lot of business ventures are actually probably seriously looking into something like that. And so with that, we are on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
All right, and up next we have a $10 super chat from Nate1, who says, do you think Ukraine will attack the Crimea bridge, and what would that do to the Russians?
I think they would like to attack the Crimean bridge, but I'm not really sure if they have the ability to, because so far we haven't seen them do it. But if they did destroy the Kerch bridge, that would destroy a massive amount of supply lines that are traveling through Crimea. We know that most of the supplies that are reaching Kherson have most likely traveled across the Kerch bridge through Crimea and then into Ukraine towards Kherson. And so if that bridge was knocked out, that entire supply burden of everything west of Melitopol, or even less west of Polochi, perhaps, may be winding up having to come from Rostov-on-Don and through that one direction, which could lead to supply line overloads, lags, and supply shortages at the front lines, which could then lead the Russians into a collapse in that area where they have to retreat. That's most likely what would happen. It would help out the Ukrainians a load. They could probably push into Crimea itself largely unopposed, because the supply lines just would not be there to support, and if to support any kind of defensive actions or even counterattacks on the Russians' end. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much once again for the support. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a $25 super chat from Praise Adonai, who says, Enforcer and Matt, I have determined why Russia is getting scared about defending the Kerch Straits Bridge. CNN has reported that the U.S. has approved long-range ballistic missiles to be sent to Ukraine. It is the HIMARS ballistic system.
Interesting. I thank you very much for the support, Praise Adonai. And I also thank you for sharing that with us, because I had not heard that before. And, you know, of course, if I had, I would definitely put that on the news. But if that is true, then that means the Russians could be looking at the bridge being hit. If a MLRS set up south of Zaporizhia, it certainly would have the range with a long-range rocket to actually hit the bridge. Now, I don't know if a single rocket, I would most likely take an entire battery of rockets, around 6 to 12, to actually cause significant damage to the bridge to the point it would be destroyed. But if that is the case, and those rockets are being sent over, that may be why we've seen the Russians testing out smoke screens and also setting up radar deflectors around the bridge in the hopes that those rockets will miss their mark. They are GPS guided, so I don't know, maybe that would help, but I feel like it most likely wouldn't. GPS works off of coordinates. Smoke and radar deflectors do not throw off GPS coordinates. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, Praise Adonai, and thank you for sharing that interesting little tidbit with us, and we will be looking into that news and seeing if we can get any follow-ups of it here on the channel within the coming days. And so thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And also, I want to thank you as well for being a longtime viewer of this channel and a Lee Spring Army veteran, because of course it does mean a lot to us that we have fans, supporters, and Lee Spring Army veterans around that have been here forever, and it means a lot to us because people have become ingrained in this community, and it's wonderful to know that we have a wonderful group of very kind people here that make sure to help out Ukraine and also just have such a wonderful community nature about themselves, like BC Skyman, you, Praise Adonai, William Allen, and everyone else. And so thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Cherie Ann Turpin, who says, God bless America, Ukraine, Japan, Enforcer Matt, and the Enforcer with love and energy.
And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for passing out blessings to all of us, including Ukraine and Japan. Japan is most likely going through very turbulent times right now, considering that their former prime minister was just assassinated in Nara yesterday. Just in case of those of y'all who did not know where Nara was, let me actually try and find Nara, because apparently it's not one of the large metropolises that span the Japanese coastline on the western side for the most part. Nara, where would that be? Let's type in Nara, Japan, because I would like to know where that was. you know, the place he got shot in the street, they're most likely going to make a historic location out of that, like a little marker in the road showing most likely where he was killed. It's an unfortunate thing, but it's certainly a historical moment that the longest serving prime minister in Japan was shot and killed by a crazy man in the middle of the street, in the middle of a small political rally. But here's where Nara is. It's actually appearing to be a suburb of Osaka, which Osaka is one of the largest and most famous cities in Japan. I actually hear, if I'm correct, Matthew, Osaka used to be the old imperial capital of Japan, if I'm correct.
I believe you're correct.
And so I think, if I remember, wait a minute, no, it's Kyoto. It's Kyoto, which is pretty much connected to Osaka, I believe. But I remember that the documentaries we used to watch together, everyone in Japan always said that the people from Osaka were snobs or something, and they viewed themselves as better than everyone else in Japan, which I thought was really interesting. And it does show that usual kind of, one part of the country is different than the rest, and so they hate them. You know, in the United States, usually it's California that is the absolute ire of everyone else in the country, or it really depends on where you're from. But from where I'm at, in Alabama, usually everyone doesn't like California. In Britain, everyone hates each other equally. It just depends on which village you're from, and sometimes the nation. If you're from Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, you hate England, and if you're from England, you hate everyone else. So, you know, it's kind of something that happens in every country, but still a very unfortunate thing to hear that you know, the former Prime Minister Abe was assassinated in a suburb of Osaka, which is called Nara, which is right here on the map. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and once again, I do send out the best wishes and condolences to Prime Minister Abe's family and also the rest of Japan for losing one of their greatest statesmen. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from LG, who says, I can't lie. There's an angry part of me that would enjoy watching us play a game of Cowboys and Rooskies.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I would have to agree. I think that would be a pretty fun game to play. I think the Cowboys would win, considering we just saw that the Cowboys have a budget of $801 billion as of 2021, and the Russians only have a budget of $66 billion. I think the Cowboys are going to be wiping the floor with the Rooskies. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. And also, I do know absolutely where you're coming from, and it was a pretty good joke at that as well. And so with that, we're going to be moving on to the next question, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Redwood Beard, who says, enough for today, more for Sunday.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I was trying to understand what you meant by that there, but I do thank you so much. It does help our channel to keep running, and we're always appreciative of everyone who supports the fundraisers and also supports us, so that way we can keep on running them. And so thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 donation from Vasily, who says, Jewish president congratulating Muslims about as anti-Nazi as one can get, and happy birthday, Operator Starsky.
And thank you so much for the support, and also the birthday wishes to Operator Starsky. And yes, I would agree. You can't really be a supposed Nazi or fascist or anything if you're supporting Muslims. And we know that out of everyone, of course, if you go down to the Middle East, and I'm talking about it in this perspective, the Jewish people and the Muslims have one of the biggest beefs that is still ongoing right now. I guess that's about the best way to put it. But then again, you know, the Pakis and the Indians, or the Pakistanis and the Indians, whatever you would like to call them, they have a pretty big beef going on amongst each other. The Indians are largely Hindi, and then the Pakistanis are largely Muslim. And so that's kind of, I guess, the same thing going on there, but that's largely over Kashmir, which is in the north. We'll probably go over that in something in the future, but that is, of course, as about as anti-Nazi as you get. And if they were a Nazi, they would be wishing bad things upon him. And, of course, Zelensky wasn't. And so, with that, I thank you so much for the support and pointing that out. And it, of course, works against Russia's story that Ukraine is just full of a bunch of neo-Nazis. And so, with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Merwin, who says, what is the response to Slava Ukraine?
Heroam Slava, that is the response. You say glory to Ukraine, and then the response is glory to the heroes. Of course, I don't really say that a lot. I usually just say Slava Ukraini, because that's what Zelensky always says. but Heroem Slava is supposed to be used. I'm not really a grammar Nazi though, and Slava Ukraini or Heroem Slava is pretty much the same sentiment. And so I just say Slava Ukraini. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support and Slava Ukraini. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $8 super chat from Tengen Bragiri, who says, I love your comments on the Russians' intellect.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I do have to say, the Russians are not the brightest people that we've seen, especially in this war. Also, I would have to say that by and large, the Russians as a nation, however they've existed as a nation, have always been behind the Europeans, the Western Europeans, although being directly connected to them, which is just weird. Because if you actually look at Poland, and I was watching a video about this today on YouTube, there's a lot of cool videos out there on YouTube, but if you take a look at Poland, Poland is still politically divided amongst the former German imperial lands that made up Poland, and then the former parts of the Russian Empire that made up Poland. And it's a really interesting little history that you can see there in the the election map. And that does kind of go to show how different economically, industrially, and politically Western countries and Russian countries have been over history. And by and large, the Russians still haven't really caught up today, although they try their hardest. And, of course, I'm not trying to be biased against them, but I gotta say that they never really give themselves a good image, especially in this war. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that did address it fairly well. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $7 super chat from Justice, who says, thank you, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and Slava Ukraine. And also, thank you, Justice.
And thank you as well, Justice, for the support. I don't know if that's your first time supporting this channel. I don't think I've heard you around before, but if it is, thank you so much once again. It does help us out a great deal. And also, Slava Ukraini. And thank you so much for wishing us the best of luck and supporting this channel, because it does mean a lot to us, both verbally and through your support, which helps to keep the lights on around here. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and moving on, we have a $7 super chat from NOYDB, who says, Shintaro Abe. In 1944, during World War II, Abe entered a naval aviation school and volunteered to become a kamikaze pilot. The war ended before he could undergo training. He's also a major politician.
Did you just say that about Shinzo Abe?
I believe that's his father he's referencing.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, I was like, Shinzo Abe wasn't alive in World War II. I was like, I was sitting there like, wait a minute. I was like, hang on, he was only 68 years old. Right now, you'd have to be in your 90s to have been old enough to have served in any regard in World War II, and most of them are dying off, which is a very sad thing. But what was the name again?
Shintaro Abe.
Shintaro Abe. Shintaro Abe, father of Shinzo Abe. Let's see here. So he was born in 1924, definitely old enough. So we can see for graduating. Yes, that's true, actually. According to Wikipedia, the story you just recounted is true. And so Shinzo was an incredibly lucky man that his father only got into the war at the right time for it to end before he could actually be a kamikaze pilot, because that led to Japan being able to have Shinzo Abe as a prime minister. And we can actually see that his dad led a pretty successful political career as well, even making his way all the way up to being the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is a higher position in the Japanese parliament, which is also another interesting thing about Japan, is that they were an incredibly isolationist country for hundreds of years, and after Admiral Perry, I believe, went to Japan, I believe that's the correct admiral, went to Japan and did the gunboat diplomacy stuff, which we did to Korea as well, which is a whole other story. The Japanese found out, wow, we're really far behind everyone else because we've been isolated for so long. And so the Japanese started to travel all around the world to try and find out what every other country was about, get political connections with them, and also just kind of make themselves known on the world stage, since that's now what they were going to be doing. And over the course of 10 years, which is when most of these delegations traveled around the world, there was a Japanese delegation that came to America and stayed here for several years. these delegations will return to Japan clad in kimonos with the with the Japanese, I guess you could say, shoes. They're the kind of clog-looking shoes with the two wooden, I guess you could say, pegs on the bottom, if you know what I'm talking about. They returned to Japan still dressed like that with a katana, and by the time they got back, several years later, the entirety of Japan had changed. No one in Japan was wearing kimonos anymore. They were now wearing suits, which they called seberus. And what's really cool about that, okay, is that seberus are actually named because the Japanese thought that suits were called seberus because Savile Row, which is a street in London, and how the Japanese understood it, sounded like Seberu. And so that's the word they came up with for a suit. It's really a cool history, but still, the Japanese kind of like stepped forward into the modern world and westernized so fast it literally made people's heads spin, and they actually became a pretty formidable force to be reckoned with in the East, and then, beyond that, later on, they've now become the third largest economy in the world, and they've produced some incredibly interesting people, ideas, and technology as well. And so with that, thank you once again for the support and sharing that interesting bit of information with us, and I hope that does give a little bit of credit to Japanese history as well, because it's a very interesting one. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
And Enforcer, it looks like the spreadsheet has frozen up for some reason, so I'm trying to get it working again. So please bear with me momentarily. Let me try to reload the page. Let's see here.
And while we wait for that, we're going to read off some more of the orc recipes. Sizzled orc bites, smoky orc bacon, filet mignon, and then Sebero. Thank you for correcting that. Curry and orc, orc sunny side up, extra runny. We're kind of nuts.
I cannot believe it's not orc.
I can't believe it. Orcwiser. Let's see.
And Enforcer, the spreadsheet is working once again.
All right, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $5 super chat from Hank R, who says, excuse me.
Faya.
I'm a faithful listener, so time I pony up some bucks.
And thank you so much for the support, and I thank everyone for making sure that we can keep these streams running, because of course, without support from viewers like y'all, these streams aren't possible. And so I thank you once again for the support and for being a faithful viewer, because while everyone can support the stream, everyone just watching it and hitting the like button is fine enough for me as support to help us to grow and keep running. And so I thank you so much for being a return viewer and also helping us to keep this thing going. And so thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
All right, and up next, I want to recognize a $5 super chat from By the Sea 760, who does not leave a comment, but thank you very much for your support of the channel. And moving on, we have a $5 super chat from Bremner's Ghost, who says, it's worth remembering that we are now in month 4 of the Russian 3-day special military operation. In that time, Ukraine has trained over 800,000 volunteers.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. I don't know about the specific number of volunteers, and we usually don't get into that on stream because of security reasons. But one thing I will say is that it is definitely 4.5 months into the Russian 3-day special military operation. Not really a special one anymore. You kind of lose the special status after the first week, and we've certainly surpassed that qualification for sure. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support and pointing that out again. It's very important to know that Ukraine, as a minor nation in Europe, has managed to stand up to what was supposedly a world superpower for 4.5 months, and the Russians are still no closer to winning now than they were within the first week. And so with that, thank you once again. I hope that does address the question fairly well. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
And we now have a super chat from Fife, who puts in a $5 donation and says, Germany also sent DM-12 or Parm 1 mines. It is pretty interesting.
Well, let's pull that up real quick. DM-12. DM-12. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit more demure right now. My headache is extreme, but we're trying to get through it. The Parm 1 mine. Oh, I know what this thing is, okay? It's, the tanks drive by, and this thing actually shoots sideways. like parallel to the ground into the side of the tank. We have seen this thing in use before, but I didn't know it was German. And so thank you very much for the support and pointing this thing out, because it's another wonderful German addition to the Ukrainian arsenal that we have seen used before, and it worked incredibly well. It knocked out 2 tanks on film. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, "More for the pizza fund, the food of the universities. Thanks."
And thank you so much, Santiago, for supporting the Pizza Fund. And we're going to make sure to chow down on that pizza like there's no tomorrow. I'm a huge fan of pizza. Always will be. I'm a pizza fan until the day I die. But I did have some good food tonight. We did get some... I got some grilled cheese sandwiches. And while pizzas and stuff and fancy food's always delicious and good to eat, the one can never forget the simplicity and the good flavor of simple foods like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, grilled cheeses, and stuff like that. There's just something nice about them every once in a while and the simplicity of them. And so we will eat those pizzas, but what about a grilled cheese fun? Now that would be nice. But with that, thank you once again for the support, and I'm going to get me some Papa John's. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from That Frost Wolf, who says, "Happy Friday, Enforcer Matt and Army. Ukraine finna beat the Ruskies with whoopee cushions. Splurf paladoof."
Well, thank you very much for the support, and thank you for celebrating us celebrating with us a happy Friday. We've made it, I believe, halfway through this week of news, which is already pretty impressive, honestly, that we've made it this far. And so thank you once again for the support. We're always greatly appreciative of it. And also, I don't know what you mean by the Ukrainians are going to defeat the Russians with whoopee cushions, but we will wait and see. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and up next, I want to recognize a $5 super chat from Jeremy Kin, a $3 super chat from Rob Scott, and also a $1 super chat from Bill G, and a $1 super chat from Zach Jeffers. All of those were left without comments, so we appreciate the support to the channel, and thank you so much for watching. For such a long time, actually. All of you are longtime channel viewers, actually. And moving on to our next super chat, we have a $5 donation from Bremner's Ghost once more, who says, "Hats off to the Ukrainian SF/shaman units that are active in Russia."
And I do have to agree that they are definitely doing an incredibly good job with sabotage. We've seen them knocking out, as far as we know, and we can only assume because we haven't seen them doing it on film, but we have seen them knock out multiple military industry factories that have been producing weapons for this war. And I do have to say they're doing an incredibly good job at causing disruption behind the lines, and hopefully they can continue to carry on those kinds of important duties until this war is over. And so thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does address the comment, and thank you once again. And with that, we're on to the next question.
All right, and up next we have a $4 super chat from Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin, who says, "As of today, Ukraine has trained over 1 million soldiers. All they need is arms. Like I said, it'll take them 3 days to liberate the whole of Ukraine."
And I thank you very much for the support. I don't know about the 1 million men trained, because I did ask Starsky about that, and he hadn't heard about those numbers about 2 weeks ago. So I'm not really sure about that. But one thing I can say is that it's always important to send over arms of every kind, and I highly support the idea of the United States sending over more. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin. You've been around for ages, and we thank you so much for being a longtime viewer and also a longtime supporter of this channel, as everyone's support, of course, helps us to keep going. And so thank you once again, and I hope that did address the question fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one. And before we move on to the next one, how many super chats do we have left?
So we actually just have 3 more left.
All right, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have another super chat from Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin, who puts in a $3 donation and says, "Coffee."
And thank you so much for the coffee. Of course, it helps us out, and it always keeps us spry and alive during these streams. Headaches aren't fun, but with coffee, one can manage. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and we're moving on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $2 super chat from Underpants Gnome, who says, "Happy birthday to Operator Starsky and stay safe."
And also, yes, happy birthday to Operator Starsky. If everyone would like to give him another round of happy birthdays in the chat, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to see those if he does watch this stream. And thank you so much once again for the support to this channel, as it helps us to keep running, keep on dispensing birthday wishes, and keep on reporting this news. And so thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And the final super chat of the night, until we get to our live chat questions, goes to the Wolverine General, who puts in a $2 donation and says, "Very concerned. Do you think Putin launched nukes?"
Launched? Like in past tense?
I think he meant to say, do you think Putin is going to launch nukes?
I don't think he will. Of course, he's mad and unpredictable, so we don't really know. But my general indication is leaning towards no. Because it wouldn't be a smart idea, and of course, mutually assured destruction is a thing, and it won't end well for them, and it won't end well for us. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And if that was meant in past tense, like has he launched him, the answer to that is certainly not, because we would have already been in a nuclear war by now. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. And we've now reached the end of our super chats for the night, and we're now going to answer 3 live chats, and I'm going to have to cut them down to 3 tonight because I have a massive headache and I don't know how much longer I can hang in here. But we're going to answer 3 questions, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. And so with that, what is our first live chat question?
And the first question we have from the live chat comes from Khan Azor, who says, "Do you think China will sell Russia their new tanks? They seem to be very capable."
The ZTZ 99As, which is what you're talking about, the ZTZ 99A right here, which we can pull up some pictures of. This is the new Chinese tank. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really think it's capable. That's just kind of my assessment. Chinese tanks always look to be cheap, you know, and that's not a bias on my end. They just look cheap. Like, the armor looks like it's just kind of like put onto the front, like placed onto it. Doesn't really look like it's secured in. Like right here, you can see the tiles actually jut off of the glacis, which you can see right there for a second. And while that is the case on Russian tanks, I just don't really know. It just seems like it's a very lightly armored tank under this explosive reactive, well, this, I don't really know how to explain it. Tile armor? I don't know. We'll just call it tile armor. I don't really think this tank is competent. And we've never actually seen Chinese tanks proven in combat, and the Chinese don't even have an idea of what war is actually like, an actual conventional war, because they haven't fought one in so long. And so I don't know if this tank actually has any merit behind it or not. I would assume, by and large, no, because the Russian tanks aren't really that good, and in my opinion, they still look better than these. And so in my opinion, I don't think they'll sell them to the Russians because, of course, they'll levy the sanctions from the West, and we all know how that story goes. Chinese economy shrinks into nothing because they'll be sanctioned into hell and back. And also, the other thing is that I don't know if the Russians would want these things because, you know, it's going to take some training, and they're not even a proven tank. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from John A. Underwood, who says, "The assassin of Abe was a socialist supporter, so could the Chinese be behind it?"
Could be, or it could just be a lunatic that killed the guy on his own. There's always the chance of that, you know, like John Wilkes Booth. While he did work with a small group of people, he largely didn't really work on behalf of anyone else. And, you know, that's one thing that I do have to say is that I have gotten death threats on the stream, of course, and most of them have come, well, really all of them have come from lunatics here in the United States. And none of them, most likely, are not working on the behalf of the Russian government. They're just nuts, and they just want me dead just because they've drank the Kool-Aid way too much, and they're just fanatics. So that could have been how that worked. You know, that could have just been some loony fanatic nut in Japan who was so crazy he just went out and killed Abe for no reason. And so the Chinese may be behind it, but usually world's a very simple place. The guy probably worked on his own and was just a nut. So I hope that does answer the question, and that's just my opinion. We don't have any information to work off of for now, so really all of it's speculation, but that's kind of my end of the speculation. And so with that, I hope that did answer the question, and we're now on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in a question?
So the lucky last viewer of the night is none other than Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, as the war of attrition continues, do you believe the government in Belarus will collapse?
I don't think they will. There's really no external pressure on them right now. They haven't even been sanctioned. And so in that regard, I don't think it would collapse. I think they're in a pretty precarious spot right now, but the Belarusian government is almost always in a precarious spot, and they're kind of just kept alive by the Russians. So in that regard, I could see the Russian government going through some tough times and getting really close, if not collapsing. But the Belarusian government, I think that's going to be largely dependent on what happens within Russia, if they too start to have some kind of a collapse or destabilization or not. And once again, that's just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. And so with that, I thank you once again for the great question. I thank you all so much for all the great questions we've had tonight and the support. It, of course, helps us to run the channel, and all of y'all, regardless whether you supported the channel or not, had incredibly good questions tonight, and I hope I was able to answer them pretty well. And so with that, we have now reached the end of this stream. If you've been watching the entire time, you're certainly a trooper, and you ought to subscribe to this channel, because we do run these streams every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and we also run daily summaries showing what's been going on in the war of Ukraine, and we do this every single day of the week, except for Mondays, summaries and streams. And so thank you all once again for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow, again at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so with that, thank you all once again, and I'll see you then. See you around, take care, and for those of y'all in America, have a great night. And for those of y'all around the rest of the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.